Greetings, everyone, for a special edition of Soccer Over There / Soccer Down Here / Transfer Day Deadline. The deals are hot and heavy, ladies and gentlemen, and I hope you are paying attention to the Twitters or to Sky Sports News or to us, because I'm joined by the always magnificent Jason Longshore, the incredible, the illustrious John Nelson. Gentlemen, how are we today?
Bueno.
Present.
Present. So how are we feeling today? The transfers are coming in. Miguel is done. Biggest deal in MLS history, I think. I'll put that there, not just from a dollar standpoint, but from a sheer business model proving standpoint.
Yeah, 100% that. It's a big deal. It is proof that the plan that Arthur Blank and Darren Eales and Carlos Bocanegra hatched about buying young talent, developing it, selling it on for a profit, it's proof that they were on the right page and they knew where this league should be headed. And now you have Don Garber saying that this is a selling league, and you have crazy things pop up against the deadline. But we have a bomba de Loich. You don't know Loich yet. Loich Tanzi. This is a bomba, so we don't have a bomba sound. We're going to have to get a bomba sound, I guess, if we keep doing this. But we have an air horn. The bomba de Loich Tanzi, and Loich Tanzi, let me make sure we get the RMC Sport. And he has hashtag breaking sport in his Twitter bio. So this is accurate. No Acosta in PSG this winter. No Luciano Acosta move that broke MLS Twitter last night and has been breaking MLS Twitter all day. It ain't happening, according to Loich.
Yeah, this is something that really came out of left field for me. This is I think Acosta can play in Liga 1. I don't think it's that issue. I just think that $10 million for what was a 10-week stint as Neymar's backup seemed a little excessive to me. I think they have more than enough talent to cover for Neymar at the moment. I don't know if Acosta would fit there long term, and that's the issue here. Is that if you are Acosta, you have to start getting into the details of what this move is going to mean for you when you get outside of Neymar's injury window. So when he comes back and he starts playing with regularity, what have you accomplished? Sure, you're in Ligue 1. Yes, you're with PSG, but you've traveled a long way to sit on the bench. So I'm okay with this if I'm Acosta. I know it's not the best move for MLS or the ideal thing for DC United, but it is what it is, and this is silly season in a nutshell.
Yeah, this one's tricky because Stephen Goff broke the news last night that this was a possibility and that Acosta, he's not at DC camp right now. He's in France. He's in Paris, according to everybody. So I think the quote was, I believe he's in Paris somewhere off the Seine. So he was there. Then a few hours ago, this was at 2:13, so less than 2 hours ago, Stephen Goff tweeted, one stateside contact is now describing the negotiations as a, quote, slugfest. Then it became a 50-50 possibility. Yeah. You know what I think happened? I think this was something that, okay, PSG looked at what they had. They looked at the Neymar injury, and they said, man, we need something. We need something. We need to go see what we can find. There was a connection. There was a conversation. It's like, okay, yeah, we can afford that. We can spend that money. All right. Now, where I wonder where things took a left turn, because we started to hear as the afternoon's gone on that, well, maybe this is not going to be a transfer but a 6-month loan. Then it starts to go back to what you were saying, Nick, about is this a true transfer? Looking at a young talent in Acosta who has a ton of potential, great dribbler. I think he can play in that league as well. But was this a move to bring in that player thinking it's a long-term thing? Or was this a move just for some extra cover, kind of like the Carlos Vela conversation about Barcelona? Just some extra cover while you have a star injured. And it seems like it twisted more to that, and PSG was not willing to pull the trigger either on a loan or a transfer or what.
Keep in mind that there's more than just the two teams negotiating here. That if Neymar's agent finds out about this and his client disapproves of this and starts voicing concern, then suddenly that can throw an extra kink into the problem as well. So if you're Acosta, what happens at the end of this loan? Where do you go? Are you stuck with Paris? Which is not the worst place in the world to be stuck, but at this time,
you got a contract.
Yeah, you got a contract. You're getting paid, but you need minutes. And as an agent, you want to protect your client. So you want to make sure that your client is in front of a camera, displaying their skill set as often as possible and in front of as many eyeballs as possible. And you can't do that from the PSG bench. And so the last thing you want is for your client to start off at DC,
let's actually go backwards here for a second, Nick. So Luciano Acosta comes over on loan from Boca Juniors. Then it becomes a permanent transfer. One of the first times DC United's actually paid out money as a transfer. So you bring on Lucho. Lucho and Wayne Rooney hit it off last year, have a great year. Lucho is part of the MLS Best 11. Remember early in the offseason, you started to see some conversations out of Lucho Acosta that, hey, it's time to pay me. I'm ready for a new contract. There was tweeting about, well, maybe, like he tweeted a picture waving goodbye, and people took that one way, followed that up with a picture of himself in a Boca Juniors kit, where he had come from, where he developed, but okay, Boca was maybe looking to spend some money. I wonder. It's been an ongoing thing about Acosta and wanting a new contract. Then this popped up out of nowhere. DC's going to have to deal with this one way or another. You're either going to have to find a deal right now, and transfer windows in Europe are starting to come to a close. And Stephen Goff said it earlier. He said it last night. He said it again all day. Don't think that PSG is the only club in this conversation. Because there was a question about, well, is he at PSG's facility to do a medical? And I was like, no, he's in Paris. Didn't say he was at PSG. He's in Paris. So maybe he's still in play, just not to PSG. Because if DC's allowed him to leave camp, he's already been unhappy about wanting a new deal. This feels like, well, maybe the agent's going to be shopping him and try to find somebody to pay whatever money DC wants. And they turned down a $6 or $6.5 million offer from a club in Saudi Arabia, according to Pablo Maurer at The Athletic. Supposedly it was going to be 10 from PSG. Is it going to take somewhere around 8, 9, 10 to get him? Is there a club that'll pay that? We'll have to see as the window is about an hour 50 left.
Well, and that's the thing is clubs in Saudi Arabia can easily cover that gap between the 6 to 10 million. That's not a problem, but is that where he wants to be? Is that where the agent wants to put him? And let's just go ahead and say, for the sake of conversation, that DC's out. That's not the plan. Going back to DC is the last resort. Fine. Being just in Paris, you have to take England off because allegedly there were issues getting an English work visa. That's fine. But there are lots of clubs in Ligue 1 that could use Acosta right now. I mean, Monaco could use him immediately. But again, is that where you want to send him?
Could you see Manchester City, because they were linked to him, could you see Manchester City buy him and loan him?
But if you want to get around any sort of issues with English work permit, I don't know how the legality of that would work, if they would be able to do an initial signing with him with that and then loan him out until that gets worked out.
Yeah,
if it
you
could happen that way.
That's happened before. Yeah, you could play that route.
Yeah, then that would be a great move for them if that was to happen. I mean, and we've seen that Man City has no problem signing MLS talent. So, sign them, stash them. No big deal on that one. And your agent looks great. You look great. PSG's loss. So, but what would concern me with that is this deal. I think there needs to be a deal with the top tier club, and meaning like France, like Ligue 1, Premier League, Serie A, La Liga. We need to have something like that. I don't want Acosta going to Turkey because MLS will say, "Hey, we've done it again," and to me, that's not the same kind of move. And so to me, this is something where I don't know where it fell apart. If it fell apart because of DC haggling, that needs to be sorted immediately. But the window is coming to a close immediately, and this is something that I would love to see what the phone lines are looking like for Acosta's agent if he went out and bought a bunch of burner phones and just laid them out in front and said, "Okay, who rings first?"
Oh man, John, I've got some work for you to take care of in just a minute.
Roger that.
John Molinaro, one of our Canadian sources who covers Toronto FC in an outstanding way. Sebastian Giovinco is another story on this side of the Atlantic today with his sale to Saudi Arabian club Al Hilal and his comments afterwards, which were borderline Nas diss of Jay-Z in the song Ether. If you don't know that one, go look it up. Well, Ali Curtis has responded. And there's video. So over at Sportsnet, John Molinaro has that. We've seen Bill Manning come out and say that he was very disappointed in the comments and that there were things in it that weren't true. This is really getting ugly. And this is something, Nick, I mean, you've seen it before where you see clubs just not handle players' futures well and not know when it's time to say, okay, we're going to re-sign you, or no, it's time to sell you, or no, we're going to play out your contract and see what happens. It seems like nobody was on the same page here, and it's going to hurt Toronto FC in the long run, I think, for future potential, purchases of bringing players in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, keep in mind that when Giovinco came over from Juve, it was something where, whoa, this kid is in his prime and he's coming to MLS. Like, what in the world is happening? And when you have a player like that in the future, the agent's going to look at this deal and say, okay, where did this go sideways and who was responsible for this abject failure of a move? And that's the only way to label it. Because if you look around at Atlanta United's deal with Miguel Almiron, did you hear anything from the player or the agent that indicated, I want out, get me to Europe? No, you didn't hear any of that. You saw pictures on Instagram of Miggy smiling, thumbs up. And what happens is you have a unified front between the player, the agent, and the selling team. So that tells the buying team, look, you're going to have to really bring some ruckus to get my player out of here because he's happy. Okay, sell my player on leaving. And when you have something like this where the team says, well, we have this, leverage over you because we have 1 year left, so we don't have to do anything with you. That doesn't work in soccer. I'm sorry, it doesn't. And you can point and say, well, you have a contract all day, but then the player gets mysterious injuries, gets out of training, and then it turns into a whole circus, and it poisons the locker room and it poisons the culture. What should have happened is Toronto should have sat down with Giovinco and said, look, we've seen the pitch from your agent. We're not doing it. But let's find a solution to get you to a team where you're going to be happy, where we can recoup the investment, and we send you off like a hero. And if you do that, then I think everyone wins. And it's clear that conversation did not take place at all on any level. And you end up with a situation where you have a player of Giovinco's talents leaving for $3 million. Just watch his highlight reel, and you can see even at his age that he's worth triple that. I think a lot of teams would pay $18 million for him. So
last summer, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you want to pay $9 million. I personally, if I'm another team, I say, okay, $18 million is done. Let's go. $18 million, let's get him out the door. But you don't want to do that. And instead you have this where your team has been nuked on social media by the player. You're standing on the international transfer market. Now people are looking a little more reluctantly. So you're going to have to take a couple of either really young talents that have nowhere to go, or they're with a team where it's a lot of risk that you're looking at as opposed to known quantities, like a Pity Martinez who comes in and says, hey, I like what you're doing. This is why I chose you, because you have a winning mentality and you know what you're doing. The next Pity Martinez will look at Toronto and say, whoa, these guys are trying to hold us to every last moment of the contract. Negative. Send me somewhere else. So this is where MLS needs to catch up. This is where they need
some
to
clubs,
have
yeah, some clubs have to. You had some different times where I think you could have handled this differently if you're Toronto. So the talk started early last season during the CONCACAF run that Giovinco wanted a new deal. He said in his statement that the option for 2020 has been declined by the team, or the team said they're not going to do it. I think it's probably a little bit more the latter, because that would come up after this season. If they said, look, we're not going to take that option, this is the last year of your contract. It's just a mess, because last summer that team was not making the playoffs. You could see it. There was a slim chance. Yeah, there was. But you cost yourself a lot of money. I'd say at least $6 million. I think you could have got between $8 and $10 million for Giovinco last summer. But what you cost yourself that you can't quantify right now is reputation. And that's the problem that I have with it. And then to make it even worse, you don't take care of this after the season ends for you at the end of October. You don't take care of this in November. You don't take care of it in December. You don't take care of it in early January before camp starts. You let this continue into your training camp. And Gregory Vanderveel, altercation with the manager, sent home. What did he say? The club didn't have a commitment to winning. What did Giovinco say? The club doesn't have a commitment to winning. Kind of funny that both of them are saying the same thing on their way out the door. That reputation, that attitude is now in your team. You've sold Victor Vasquez. You've sold Sebastian Giovinco for $4 million total. Gregory Vanderveel, are you going to be able to get anything for him? No, because it came out that he got into an altercation with the manager. You're going to have to just cut bait. Mm-hmm. So 3 key players gone. Attitude in the camp, not good. And now you're 3 weeks away from CONCACAF Champions League. You can't do it this way. If you know you're not going to re-sign him, you've got to have that conversation that you mentioned, Nick. You've got to sit down and say, look, you want X, we're not going to do X. What can we do here to make you happy? Do you want to go now? Do you want us to find you a club right now? Okay. Do you want us, because the other thing they could have done, so if he had an option at the end of 19, and they were worried about him going into the last 6 months of his contract and being able to sign on a free. If he had an option in 2019 for 2020, that's not the case. Because you could have said the option's going to be triggered, and then we're going to sell you, and we're going to make a profit on the deal, because that's what we're trying to do here. So somebody's not completely telling the whole story, and you don't know who it is, but it looks awful on all accounts. It is a very bad situation.
Yeah, and this is something that is going to have to be reviewed. I think because the way that MLS is structured, I think you're going to have some people sit down and say, okay, guys, going forward, when we have a player in this situation, let's try to handle things a little differently.
Yeah, I mean, MLS shouldn't have to come in and play the dad role here, but it looks like they're going to have to for certain clubs, because this is awful reputation for the league too.
Yeah, and it's something where, just like the rising tide raises all ships, which is what we had with the Miguel Almiron move, where now teams could say, okay, the investment model works. We have this situation which says, okay, we also have some tremendous challenges, because that sinking tide, right, that as the tide goes out, the boats can lower just as quickly. So it's something where there needs to be some processes put in place by Toronto where they could say in the future, all right, this is how we will conduct ourselves as a club. And, at this point, you can't do anything about Giovinco. You can't undo the fact that he posted that on social media. You can maybe a year or 2 years from now have a Legends Day and, try to smooth the waters by having him come out and get his cheer from the crowd if you want. But when I read his full statement, and he talks about, hey, this is the city where my kid, kicked his first ball, and my other kid was born, and this is where we wanted to be. It's really a situation where, you could just see that it was a titanic failure across the board. So, I just keep looking back at Atlanta and saying, this clearly went the right way, where ownership, management, player representation, all on the same page. And let's look at the Acosta deal, right? The Acosta deal, even though they had challenges in that relationship, who all knew that this was happening until he was in Paris, right? So, I mean, obviously they're trying to work that out the right way as well. But this is something that as we move into a selling league, which is the future, we have proven the model works. Now we need to see if other teams can play catch up with what Atlanta and Vancouver and Red Bulls are doing. So if they can do that, great. But if not, you are at risk of damaging the credibility of the entire league with your stupidity. So get sorted.
Yeah, it's a problem. I mean, John, you know the Toronto scene pretty well, and we've been hearing some things, not just related to Giovinco, just some overall unrest. That's a bit of an issue for Toronto going forward. But how surprised were you when this came down to it, that Giovinco was going to be transferred for the amount that it's going to be, $2 to $3 million?
Well, the question for me has always been, with the big three, about maximization of the asset. This was not that. Heading into the last year of a deal, you run the risk of losing the player outright on a free. And yep. I think that Toronto FC was fortunate to get what they got from Al Hilal for Giovinco. I honestly think that something should have been done with Giovinco or Bradley or Altidore or some combination of all three last year. And for me, that's a big sign of how things are going. And we've also heard things unsubstantiated about more unrest on multiple levels. And now you have fan bases pointing fingers at Ali Curtis about, completely and totally tearing something down. And it is bordering mass hysteria right now with what is going on in the Giovinco situation. And where Bill Manning says one thing on sports talk radio in the morning, and Giovinco basically just pipe bombs his old organization in a multi-paragraph screed, for lack of a better word. But this is a mess, and it goes back to what we've been talking about. You're supposed to have a plan, and it looks more and more like the new guy on the job got caught, was surprised, and now doesn't have a plan. So is part of the plan.
It's not just his fault, because there was a guy in the job before that I think helped it get here.
Yes, no doubt. But it seems like multiple individuals didn't have a plan, and you're just kind of sitting there thinking that it'll sort itself out toward the end. That's not how it works. You're supposed to have some kind of an idea as to how you want things to go a year or two down the line, or a transfer window or two down the line. And so that, to me, it's a larger question here as to how dysfunctional things are right now. If you take into account Vanderbilt, you take into account Giovinco, you take into account that you have two other DPs in the last year of a deal who could be just wandering away, even though they front office has said that they have offered those two individuals contract extensions.
Hold that thought. One point here that is very, very important, that it needs to be resolved by somebody in this. Giovinco said there was an option that let's get the quote from Giovinco, because Giovinco said that there was an option for 2020. That changes the whole conversation, because then the whole thing about he could leave on a free, no, because you could claim the option and keep him. Now, if you've decided that, no, we're not going to take the option, we're going to move on, well, then you've put yourself in this situation, because you could have kept more leverage if you had said you're going to pick up the option or picked it up and then sold him, because then you're not worried about that 6-month thing. That's a very important factor in this. It sounds like minor. It sounds like we're quibbling over something. But, Nick, I mean, that's such a critical thing here. And here, let me find it. Here is what Sebastian Giovinco said in his statement on his Instagram. He said, recently, after refusing to exercise the club option for 2020, I was offered terms that I deemed unacceptable. So I don't know what the deadline was on this 2020 option. It feels a little strange that it's this early. Doesn't mean that it's not, Just not typical. Usually it's at the end of the season before the option would take effect. But if they said, we're not doing it, if they didn't have to do it yet, or if they did have to do it and they said, we're not doing it, we're going to offer you a different deal, they've made this problem a little more difficult for themselves. And I think Toronto gets a little bit less of a break in that 6-month thing about him being able to walk on a free, because they had a chance to keep him. Now, they would have had to, that's the poker you play here. If you had picked up the option and then you can't find the sale, you're on the hook for $7 million. You're on the hook for that salary. But you only got $3 million coming back, maybe. So I don't think you played poker very well here. That's what it feels like, is you just didn't handle it, and now you've got a lot of unhappy people, fans, possibly other players. Sounds like now there are offers on the table for Michael Bradley and Josie Altidore. A couple days ago, there was no conversation with Michael Bradley. That's what was said by the club. Yep. Now there's an offer on the table. What is happening in Toronto? Let's see if Ali Curtis gave us any answers to that. This was from Sportsnet. Good work, John, to pull this real quick and get it into the show. Here's Ali Curtis from Canadian television just a little bit ago.
Obviously, a very difficult post to read. Giovinco's been great for the club over the last 4 seasons, and the club has been great for Giovinco. And it's his time is he's departing and leaving. We appreciate everything that he's done for the club, so it was really difficult to read that.
I guess there was a part where he said that he would have accepted less money to stay in Toronto. Apparently, that's his position. Just wondering your response to that part.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, I'm new to the club, and there's been some discussions before I got here. But I've had multiple conversations with his agent, both Bill and myself. That was news to us. It was not our understanding that they were willing to move in any way from a financial perspective and a contract perspective. So that's news to us.
So why make this move now? Could you not have continued negotiating into the 2019 season?
Yeah, we were committed to try to bring Giovinco back for a contract extension. And, as I mentioned earlier, we had some conversations earlier. We continued those conversations down in Los Angeles with his agent as well as Sebastian. We wanted to find a solution. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. But we expected him to be wearing a Toronto FC jersey going into the season. So a lot of things happened really quickly that, we didn't anticipate that he wanted to leave and go play in Saudi Arabia. So it's unfortunate.
So the plan was for him to be in a Toronto jersey this season. The plan was that when camp opened, Giovinco on day one said he wasn't happy and that there had been offers for him. And now it ends with Sebastian Giovinco making an Instagram statement and on the way to Saudi Arabia for the club is saying more money than he's getting in Toronto. Giovinco said he would have taken less money to stay in Toronto. It's really bad.
Years? It's really bad.
We don't know. We don't know who's saying what, and we don't know who's telling the truth because there's a bunch of things here that factor in. I'm really hung up on the option not being picked up or acting like it doesn't exist because there was a lot of talk about they can't lose him for a free in the summer, signing that pre-contract. If you had the option, that wasn't the case. So I don't know. The whole thing sounds really strange, and there's probably going to be more that comes out of it, I would assume. I mean, Nick, we'll have to see where Toronto goes from here, and they will, have to get active in the transfer market because they're missing a lot of people from a team that should be challenging in the Eastern Conference. Mm-hmm. But let's move on to really, I think we can talk for just a minute about the bigger picture of MLS in the transfer window. This is new to turn on NBC Sports Network and see Miguel Almiron's smiling face.
Yep.
Leading off the transfer coverage. It's new to be in this situation. It's new for MLS to be front of mind in a major, major deal in Europe. And I don't think it's the last time we're going to be here with this, Nick. This feels like the new norm going forward.
And it should be. And when we go back and the old days of MLS, what was the business model, right? We put butts in seats. We scrape by a living, and we call it good. And then finally, okay, well, we're going to bring in some big names. We're going to get a little bit of global clout, people on the back end of their contracts who still have some usable years. None of those have a tremendous amount of viability to them. Yeah, you could be stable, but you're not going to experience this nuclear-powered growth that you will have when you start moving assets, when you start developing talent, shipping it overseas. And the best part in my mind is that we have players like Andrew Gutman, Manny Perez, who are young players who are being loaned by European clubs, like American players who are being loaned by European clubs back to the U.S., right? So it's proof that we, can develop talent here, that send them overseas, and there's value. And Miguel Almiron, yes, he's Paraguayan, but there are players who are going to, teams who are going to look at this and say, hey, he came from MLS, right? Okay, how much did they get him for? Oh, awesome. Yeah, why don't we go and tap that league for some talent? You see the Germans doing it, right? You see Bayern, Dortmund. These aren't minnow clubs. These are clubs who understand financial realities. They understand financial fair play in Europe, and that the best way to make money and be profitable is to find young talent with minimal risk, because you sign them for next to nothing, and then you sell them for an insane profit, $74 million. And when you have that kind of mindset, MLS, as what we have called on this show, is a non-traditional market, it's going to be tapped. And this is just step one. And the next steps are going to become fast and furious, because before you know it, it's not going to be just Newcastle on the phone. It's not going to be just, oh, well, player is, doing a medical with PSG. Soon it's going to be like, oh, PSG signing MLS player. Soon it's going to be Dortmund signing MLS player, Bayern signing another MLS player. And as these deals keep coming in, it's going to solidify us in that position as the new Eredivisie, which is that selling league, where we are a trusted source of talent, where players from Argentina and Brazil and Colombia and Venezuela will look at us and say, yeah, I'm perfectly okay going to MLS, where I know that my check is guaranteed to cash, where I can walk around without security. So not only do I have a good amount of pay that I'm going to be making, but also a better quality of life and quality training, which will then propel me to Europe. So this is exactly where we need to be. And as MLS fans, we need to start looking at this almost like we do college football, where we have that favorite player and say, wow, I love this player. I wish this player could stay at my school for years to come, but I understand they have to move on to the pros. And we look at them when they get drafted, and we say, hey, look, that's our guy. And we have that in the Super Bowl this weekend here in Atlanta. A bunch of Georgia Bulldogs will be playing, and UGA fans are going to be going nuts watching their guys play. But if we take that mentality and we put it on MLS, it's going to make things a lot smoother. And it's going to, in my mind, it'll improve the product. And you will see an amount of growth with MLS in the coming years, which will be absolutely unbelievable. I mean, somebody tweeted that today on the amount of revenue that's been generated by this league from transfers from like 5 years back. I wish I had it in front of me. And it was amazing to look at. So, Jason, I look forward to seeing more of these teams like Miami and Austin, who are developing academies right out of the gate to get that talent and start becoming that trusted source for these teams overseas.
Yeah, there's so many things happening right now. Let's clarify a couple things. There's been a couple questions from people listening and people who are new to the transfer world. First up, UK radio is reporting that Miguel Almiron's work visa won't be ready for him to play this weekend. That's another kind of next step after a transfer is done. I don't know the process over there. Even here, it's a little bit of a mystery. Usually it's pretty quick after a transfer here. I don't know how much more difficult it is there, but they're saying that he's not going to be ready to play this weekend. Gives him a little more time to settle into the squad. Another thing about the windows, because there's different windows for different leagues. The major European leagues are closing today. Portugal closes on the 2nd. Saudi Arabia closes on February 4th, one that's come up a couple times in conversations. Argentina is February 20th. Brazil is in April. MLS's window doesn't close until early May. it's not about where the player is coming from. Your window has to be open to accept a player. It's incoming. So MLS can sign guys from wherever. They can sign guys from wherever up until that window closes in early May. So they have plenty of time. Now, this is something that I do think gets, I would say, misreported. This is a quote coming out about Toronto, and we don't want to harp on Toronto, but it's a big story, and it does, I think, prove a point right here. So Toronto is planning to go big to replace Giovinco. This is from Sam Stajkal and Vasquez. Sam is told that the club is aiming to sign a younger attacker as a designated player in the next couple of weeks. Remember, they start Champions League in 3 weeks. If the player's signed, the fee will likely be among the highest in MLS history. Okay. Targeting 1 to 2 targeted allocation money signings this window as well. Now, our friend Lewis Martin asked about the window part of it, somebody from Argentina or Brazil, and Sam replied, no, it can be from anywhere. Only window that matters is the window of the buying team. MLS is open until May. That's true. That's very true. But we know how this goes. How many times, John, have we seen a signing be talked about, negotiated, worked on, and the other club says, we have to have a replacement ready. We can't do the deal until we have the replacement lined up. Right now, if you're trying to get a player from Europe, they got an hour and 20 minutes to line up that replacement. So whoever this is that they're working on spending big money for would likely be from outside Europe, or it's a player in Europe who a club can afford to let go. So that's going to be somebody from a club who's either definitely relegated, which there's really not anybody in that case right now, a club who is definitely safe in the middle of the table, well, maybe, or it's a player who is not playing and not part of the squad.
Loaned out.
Not important. Well, no, not even loaned out necessarily, because okay, then you're going to have to pull that loan. That's a political process, too. If you have a player loaned out somewhere and you say,
that's
okay, PSV or Ajax or Feyenoord or whoever, yeah, I mean, that's a guy who's being talked about right now. Sky sources are saying he has agreed to terms to join Crystal Palace, so probably not him. But a player like that,
yes.
Okay, if you break a loan to sell the player, you're probably not going to loan a player to that club again. It's not easy to bring a guy in after this window is closed from Europe because of all that. That's something to keep in mind.
Jason, I have a question. Did you say that Toronto is saying that it's going to be one of the highest transfers paid?
Yes. This is what Sam Stajkal, who is an MLS insider, great source of information. If you're not following him on Twitter, Sam, Stejskal. This is his tweet. He said, in case there was any doubt, Toronto planned to go big to replace Giovinco and Vasquez. Told club is aiming to sign a younger attacker as a DP in next couple weeks. If signed, the fee will likely be among the highest in MLS history.
So how with Miguel, how much did he cost? $8 million, roughly.
Anywhere between 8 and 11. Yeah, okay. 8-ish is a fair bet.
And so
Barco was 15. Here, that's the highest.
And see, this is my concern. You have teams that they're squawking about how high of a transfer fee they paid. Oh, this is going to be such a huge transfer fee paid. That's not the important thing. The important thing is how much you sell that asset for. Mm-hmm. Because if you bring in a player for $15 million and then you have to get rid of that player for 10, that's not a fantastic business model.
Better have won some trophies.
You better have won something. And if Toronto is unable to secure a renewal for Bradley or Altidore, and they put themselves in a position like they are currently, where they're having to race to put this car together while it's trucking down the road toward CONCACAF Champions League, this has the risk level on this is so high that it's beyond absurd. You should not be talking about how high of a transfer fee that we're going to pay. It's going to be the biggest ever paid. Great, good for you. But talk to me about how you have a vision for the future on how you're going to construct your club to be competitive, fiscally responsible, and how you're going to put players overseas. Talk to me about that. Then I'll be impressed. But until then, all you're doing is squawking about something to keep your fan base quiet because they're at the gates with the pitchforks and the torches. So I wish you the best of luck, Toronto, but come to me with a vision on what you plan to do for the future because you don't have one right now. You blew it. So
I'll give you a name. Iva Skalarsep has already put out there Algerian playmaker Sofian Hani, currently at Spartak Moscow as a DP replacement for Giovinco.
However, that has been debunked as the big one.
Okay.
That was,
A1.
and Andrew Wiebe actually debunked that pretty straight away and said that's not the player that he was hearing.
Okay. But as a rule, the Russian window is open until the 22nd.
So they could get a replacement if they wanted to get a deal done now.
Yes.
Okay. So that's one country to consider. There is talent in Russia that you could go get and would be big. Not big name, but that's okay. We've seen that you don't have to just get a big name in this league. And Toronto has a great fan base. You don't have to go get a name to sell some shirts. That's not the case in Toronto. You need talent, and you need to win. That's the expectation in Toronto now. It's not okay to be mediocre. It's not okay to have the season they had last year. That's why it's a little surprising that you're in this situation. David Benson has a question for you, John.
Hit it.
He wants you to check to see if Toronto is looking at tape on Santiago Muñez to replace Giovinco.
Although I will say this, there were some folks who were trying to figure out if Santi and Miggy were in fact the same person.
Definitely
looking at promotion stills.
Yeah,
and
really
then there were
close.
others who wondered if Santi Muñez, like David, has, if he could be picked up on a free and could help out Newcastle as well, because we all know they need all the help they can get when it comes to putting the ball in the back of the net. So, yes. So, David, I did watch last night, full disclosure, watch the movie. So, yes. Goal the Dream Begins has now been a movie that I have officially seen.
I think Santi's retired, David. I don't know if he's going to help Toronto very much at this case. I don't know if he's going to move a lot of shirts. We have a slight bomba de golf at Soccer Insider. Getting word from two separate places that Sporting Kansas City might end up acquiring Arsenal's Gideon Zelalem, the U.S. Youth International whose career has been stalled by injuries, awaiting more info.
Huh.
Zelalem to Kansas City is in play.
Liam Ridgewell to Hull City has been played.
Yeah, Ridgewell. And, okay, here's another one. This is, Nick, I'll let you have it, this one. Portland, I guess, decided not to pick up the option on Liam Ridgewell's contract, or they let it run out, and he immediately goes to sign on a free to Hull.
Yeah.
Bad business?
Hashtag MLS. So we need people to understand that when you sign a player or pick up an option, it's years of control in which you can make money on said asset. End statement. So when we talk about Joseph Martinez having, like a 5-year contract, well, that's fine and great, but it's 5 years in which the team has the ability to sell him and make a tremendous profit. So it's great for teams to say, yes, in order to be fiscally responsible, we are not going to pick up this player's option. We will let this player go on a free. But what does that do for your club? Even if it was $3 million, let's say you said, hey, look, we're going to pick up Mr. Ridgewell, we're going to pick up your option, but understand we're going to move you. And we're going to move you for whatever we can get for you. Would you like to go to Hull? Let's try to see if we can work a deal with Hull. And if Hull comes back with the right amount of money, boom, you get something. And just look at the MLS landscape whenever we see these discovery fees that teams pay Atlanta United, just because we went and had a scouting department that found this player and said, yep, discovery rights, haha. What is it, Jason? Like $100,000, $200,000 per discovery sign?
Depends on the situation. Like if they're on a discovery list, it's $50,000 in general allocation money. Sometimes there's, I guess, another type of way to have rights on somebody that you have to negotiate. You might have to pay more. It's weird.
But it's monetization. So you found a way to monetize your scouting department. You have to do the same thing across the board with your team. You have to find different ways to get your revenue. And putting butts in seats and selling jerseys is not enough. And if you could have gotten extra $500,000 for Ridgewell, is that better than letting him walk on a free?
Right. I mean, if you could have picked up the option and said, you know what, we're going to pick up this option so we can make a little bit of money on this, and then we're going to sell you wherever you want to go. We're going to work it out for you.
Yeah, and there has to be a way for, you could put in a clause that, hey, both parties have the ability to mutually terminate a contract if you're not able to work a deal.
Look, that's what happened with Tito at San Lorenzo. Tito Villalba at San Lorenzo was coming up out of his contract, and there was a lot of talk about him going to Boca. He signed a new deal with San Lorenzo so they could make money on the sale, and it ended up being with Atlanta United. This does happen.
Yes, that's exactly what happens around the world on a regular basis. And I get that clubs say, well, we have to mind our books. You don't see our books. Stay out of our business. Well, that's fine and great. But if you're continuing to run your business like this in this day and age, then you're not doing it right. Because if you want to be a global player, you have to play the global game. And that includes messing with contracts, playing around with numbers to get it to work just so you have leverage. And that's where I think the next arms race will be. Not in just young talent acquisition, but getting the right brain power in the front office to say, look, this old American way of doing things, great, our game, our league, whatever, get out. Okay, yeah, you from a mid-table European club that is used to running on a budget and flipping players, get over here because you're running our team now. And if you have a track record of success, that model can work anywhere. Darren Eales has proven it. He didn't have Gareth Bale to ship to Real Madrid here at Atlanta United, but he still managed to get the highest outbound transfer fee in history for the league. It can work, but you have to play the game, and the brain power is a part of it. So upgrade your front offices and start monetizing, weaponize your scouting department, weaponize your contracts team. You make that money any way you can, because I promise you, $50,000, $100,000 is better than nothing. So
don't be afraid to sign guys to longer deals. It's something that Darren Eales has talked about a lot, about having guys under contract for a long period of time. If your scouting is what it should be, you should feel comfortable committing to these players for that period of time. That's big. I mean, Miguel signed a 5.5-year deal at Newcastle. That's big because, okay, if he is the player at Newcastle for 5.5 years and does great, well, he's going to be a legend at Newcastle, and they might have a trophy outside of St. James's Park. If he passes that and they're able to sell him for a profit, well, they had him under contract for that period of time. That's the whole key here. We do have an update out of Paris. This is from Paris United, which is the account that said the Acosta deal was done earlier today. I think it was actually this morning during the normal SDH time slot. On their English account, and I've double-checked it, Paris United, the French account's followed by 98,000 people on Twitter. It's a trusted account, or at least a big one. Their English account's not followed by as much, but it's the same content. Regarding Acosta, despite having his medical this afternoon in Clairefontaine, he will not sign with PSG. Negotiations led by Enrique, who is the sporting director of the club, Antero Henrique. According to Paris United, it says negotiations led by Henrique without the approval of Tuchel. Same for the sale of Adli. And now they are about an hour and 10 minutes with a window open, and they need to find something. Yeah.
And following that up, Thomas Tuchel is not satisfied with the transfer window. He'd approved Idrissa Gueye in the first place, favorable to Mendes. Enrique preferred the Brazilian to the Senegalese. Tuchel still wants Rabiot to be reintegrated while Enrique doesn't. So PSG's got some angst.
And PSG's had some of these issues, right, Nick? I mean, they haven't exactly handled. They have a ton of money to spend, but they haven't exactly been smooth in how they spend it.
No, you have Rabiot, who's talking about wanting to go. He's listing off teams. He wants to go to Barcelona. He wants to go here. He wants to go there, and they've removed him from the squad. And he's actually gone to court to say, well, you have to put me back in that squad because you can't. What you're doing to me is wrong. Just because I want to transfer doesn't mean I need to be removed now, because he's going in the summer. And they've tried to make moves with Spurs. They've tried to make moves with other teams. And he says, I'm only willing to go to like these 3 teams. And Barcelona, I think, is at the top of his list. But when you have a player, this is why we talk about being on the same page with your player, that the minute that player says, hey guys, I think I want out, you need to engineer a move immediately, even if it's not necessarily what you want to do, simply because you have to get as much money as you can. And now that player will be leaving probably for free at the end of the year, and you get nothing out of it. So you're allowing a tremendous asset to walk out the door while you're in the middle of Champions League, while you're in the middle of the domestic season, which you don't have to worry about if you're Paris Saint-Germain because you're infinity points ahead of everyone else.
There's that.
But you do still have to worry about Champions League because this team is built and has undergone financial fair play scrutiny from top to bottom just so they can win the Champions League. And you need depth and talent to do that. And if Rabiot is not involved in this, well, that's one less bullet you have in your gun, and you should do better. So, again, handle it in advance, work with the player and the agent, no matter how problematic that may be, to try to get the best result for everyone.
It's a wild time, and this is new for MLS to be in this conversation. It's definitely new for MLS to be in the conversation with a Champions League squad like PSG and a player from MLS's best 11 potentially going there. And now it looks like it's hit a snag because the manager and the sporting director are not on the same page. Mm-hmm. Oh boy.
Yes, and this is where they need to. This is where the manager. Like you have some teams where the manager has zero input in transfers. He just says, give me a squad and I'll win with them.
And that's more typical. I'd say that's more of the norm.
But you do have some managers who say, no, I need to know who's coming into my squad because I need to know if they're going to fit, not just from the playing style, but the culture. And if you're a team like PSG where you've had culture issues, players at each other's throats, and you're finally getting that solved, that's probably why Tuchel's like, no. I need to know exactly who's coming in, and I did not approve this.
Oh, boy. Okay, one league that the window is closed is Italy. Was there any surprises in the Italian window, Nick?
Juve was a little more active than I thought they would be. But, I mean, really, Italy at this point, I thought there would be more moves happening than there were. I thought that Roma would try to beef up their squad. That didn't happen. I thought that Inter would try to upgrade their squad tremendously. That really didn't happen. Instead, they're talking about players leaving. And there's rumors that Antonio Conte has been seen in Milan. And so now Spalletti has his Antonio Conte boogeyman haunting the streets of where he lives. So I'm more surprised at the moves that weren't done. The move for Piontek to AC Milan has been he came out, he scored a brace in his first game with them, his first full game. So the move where they ditched Higuain, brought in Piontek, looks like it's proven to be absolutely masterful from Leonardo. Meanwhile, Higuain looked absolutely lost for Chelsea. And is he at the end of his line? And did Chelsea somehow end up with a rotten sack of apples, for lack of a better term, lack of a radio safe term anyway, because, it certainly looks that way. So Milan, with financial fair play struggles, doing the deals that they had, bringing in Paqueta, bringing in Piontek, that to me was very impressive. They did it all on a budget, and they did it, in the 30 to $50 million range per player. So, I mean, that's it. That's now, as we have seen, that's into MLS's wheelhouse. So when we talk about down the road, when Piqué comes up, keep in mind, Italy will be a landing spot for him. But Milan's moves were good. That surprised me. And Juve being a little more active than I thought they would be surprised me as well.
The Colonel sent a tweet that I do not believe is accurate, Colonel. I'd like to know where you got your information. Said that France, Germany, and Spain windows don't close until February 2nd. Not according to FIFA and the FIFA transfer management system that I'm looking at right now. It was last updated earlier in January. If the dates changed, FIFA has not updated them, and all of them are scheduled to end on January 31st today. Portugal is listed as ending on February 2nd. FIFA could be wrong. I mean, it's FIFA. not gonna say that FIFA's right and everything, but that's the information that I'm looking at in the transfer management system. So,
you get the right amount of money in the right hands. I think FIFA's proven that they can be a little more malleable.
This is true. Maybe some money was slipped over for France and Germany and Spain to keep their windows open a little bit longer. John, any big shocks out of England thus far? I mean, is the Miguel Almiron deal the biggest on the table right now? I guess the Batshuayi could be an interesting one if that happens.
Yeah. Right now, it is Newcastle breaking their all-time transfer fee record for Miguel. That is the largest news. And coming out of Lane 8 here with about an hour to go, it is the Michy Batshuayi finally finding a home at Crystal Palace. Everton has rejected PSG's new bid of £26.2 million for Idrissa Gueye. And we've just mentioned how much Thomas Tuchel wants that. You've had a couple of other minor deals. Obviously, Peter Crouch and the Robot Dance making it back to the Prem with Burnley to help them out with an extra 20 minutes and some height to get some goals late in matches. But really right now, today, it's Denis Suarez on loan to Arsenal, and a lot of folks drawing the ire of Arsenal for just getting players on loan as opposed to investing. And so I would say that probably those three right now of Almiron, Denis Suarez, and Batshuayi in the last little bit would be your top three stories.
Watch a move out of England that could be that could raise some eyebrows. And you have Bill Wilmot leaving Watford, going to Udinese. He's a younger player. Believe England international, but at the same time, it's on a loan deal, but they have the same ownership. So the same guy owned Watford as owned Udinese, and that's something that, I think could raise some eyebrows. So it's going to be interesting to see how he transitions to Serie A. And that's a club that's not doing phenomenally well, but, every little bit helps.
Thomas Jawin has a counter for you, Nick. His question or his comment is, in MLS, you're not just taking the risk that you have to pay the player if you can't find a willing buyer. You're also taking the risk that you will handicap your roster by using budget space on a player you no longer want. The cap and roster rules do make it a little different conversation. I'll give Thomas that.
They do. It provides a little bit more of a concrete ceiling, and that's 100% true. But again, that's why I go back to the player and the team being on the same page, along with the player's representation. We keep leaving out the player's representation here because I don't know why, but it's critical because, if we just go back and look at the Malcolm transfer and that debacle, that was all agent driven. And so if we have a player and an agent who's working with the team in concert, and you say, hey, look, team, we will exercise the option, but we will have a clause in this contract that says we can mutually terminate at any time, then that will allow you to say, okay, prospective buying club, we have this player under option. He's under control. And if you need him right away for your winter transfer window, then by all means, pony up some cash, offer us a deal. And they can take that deal. Now, if you have a situation like Giovinco, where there allegedly deals have been offered, shot down on both sides, and you have some controlling interest left, then you have to move the player. But that's why we have to handle these things earlier on in the process, so that way everyone is on the same page. The player knows he's going to move. The team knows he's going to move. The contract is just out there as leverage to let the other teams know that you're dealing with a united front and you're going to have to pony cash in order to get that player out the door.
Yeah, that's what I keep coming back to is it happens far too often in MLS that they leave the business in the transfer window until the very end. It happens far too often with bad teams in Europe as well, because when you leave it up against the deadline, you're not going to be able to get as good of a deal or as good of a sale. You're going to be dealing with a smaller market. Atlanta United's been very good thus far in its history of getting deals done early and making moves quickly and being proactive. That's critical, and I think more MLS teams need to look at it. I mean, you're going into CONCACAF Champions League, and you're trying to get a expensive young attacking designated player
Yeah.
Okay, so you're not going to have him for Champions League. And if that's the case, that's fine. When are they going to factor into this team? Because the season starts the weekend of March 2nd.
Well, let's go back to your poker analogy there for a minute, Jason, where Atlanta United went and got Pity Martinez, knowing they still had Miguel Almiron on the roster, that you had allegedly a hard window that you had to get roster compliant by. But they had options. You could loan out Barco. I mean, hell, you could have loaned out Almiron. You had an infinite number of ways that you could win the game. Just like
hold that thought, Nick. We've got an air horn on this one.
Yep.
Uh-oh.
So DiMarzio has chimed in on the Luciano Acosta potential deal to PSG. They're saying it came down to money, and it came down to a difference of $1.5 million. DC United wanted $13 million for Luciano Acosta. PSG was only willing to go up to 11.5. That's from DiMarzio.
You played the Atlanta game and lost.
Well, there's still an hour, and he's in Paris. So
if you're only $1.5 million
like
apart and you've got an hour to go.
Ooh, this could get really interesting.
As Kenny Rogers said, you got to know when to hold him and know when to fold him.
Oh, who is doing this deal for DC United? I can't wait to see what ends up happening.
It sounds very
Other headlines real quick from overseas.
Okay.
Anthony Martial is now signed through 2024. Yuri Tielemans has now completed a loan to Leicester.
But that Martial deal, that's exactly what we've been saying. Contract control.
Yep.
Remember, go back to the beginning of this baseball season. What was the big conversation around Acuna? Well, he needs to come up right now. But no, if he goes to the minors for the first, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever, you get an extra year of control and arbitration. It's critical.
Right.
You got to do it. So they kept him in the minors to get that extra year of control. It's unbelievably important because it gives you leverage on these things. You have to do it. So Martial, is he going to be at Manchester United through 2024? Maybe. Who knows? Yeah. But they've got that control of his deal.
If Almiron falls out of control and Newcastle makes it, let's say, theoretically mid-table to
Europa.
Top, if they get to Europa League, do you not think some La Liga team will call up and say, hey, why don't we talk about this player here? You have 5 years to do it. You have 5 years to make that deal. You have 5 years for Almiron to fall out of control. And again, there are options. And going back to the MLS conversation, why MLS has these hard caps and hard rules and hard things. Yeah, but there are options. I just don't have to beat you with a full house. I can beat you with three of a kind. I can beat you with a straight. There's ways I can win outside of just this one way to do it. So we have to have options. We have to exercise those options. And if DC United is seriously being this dumb over which would not shock me, over €1 million, then they deserve to have these kinds of issues and a pissed off player who won't be coming back. In my mind, PSG knows there's no way Acosta is getting back on a plane going back to the U.S. So we're going to end up with a deal. We just wait him out. So because at this point, the player and the team are clearly not in concert.
Tafka TLC chimes in, and it's a little bit different take on the contracts in MLS and how it goes down. So talking about Liam Ridgewell in Portland, Tafka says, at his age and his less than stellar ability, I would argue that one. Liam Ridgewell's move to Hull may only have happened because he was free. Maybe they get a little, but risking keeping him on the roster for very minor fee is less a condemnation of Portland than most of these issues. I do like the mutual right to cancel the contract if no deal is found, but why would a player agree to be unemployed if a team won't buy you? Which is to say that the player knows he would more easily find a new club without any needed transfer fee, so agreeing to that mutual cancellation term would seem very unlikely. Here's my counter to that, Tafka. Let's take the Giovinco deal, because this is how it generally goes. It's a club option that's negotiated in to extend the contract. It's not a mutual option. It's not a player option. It's a club option. So in this case with Portland, I'll have to go back and look to see if they declined his option or if he was just flat out of contract. Sure, maybe Hull signed him because he was free, and that's why they signed him, and they might have went to somebody else if they had decided that, we don't want to give any kind of a transfer fee. But this is where MLS has been since day one. I've watched MLS far too often cancel a player's contract because a club wants the player, but they don't want to pay a transfer fee to MLS. That happened for years. That's why it kept happening, because clubs kept doing it. At some point, the club has to understand that they have to sign guys to maintain that leverage, whether it's club options on the end of deals, which MLS does a lot of, or it's signing guys to longer deals and committing to it. So the way you get Liam Ridgewell to give up that ability to walk, you sign him to a longer deal and you say, look, Liam, we're going to pay you and we're going to guarantee your contract for 5 years. Now, at his age, no, you're not going to do that, obviously. But you're going to sign the guy for a longer period of time so you have that control. If it's time to move on, you then find a deal. MLS is in a different place now than they were 5 years ago, 3 years ago, maybe 2 years ago. In this situation, you have to do this from a business perspective. You can't let guys walk on freeze on a regular basis, because then you get clubs who say, I'm not going to pay $27 million for Miguel Almiron. Why should I? Your league isn't worth dealing with. I'm not going to pay $13 million for Luciano Acosta. Why? Your league's not good enough. I'm not going to pay for Bill Hamid. That happened. Walked on a free. I'm not going to pay for him. I don't have to. You have to do these deals to where you're going to have that control. Now, if you lose out on some players, if you lose out on a Liam Ridgewell, well, if he's not that good to begin with, you sign another center back who will agree to it. Because there's players all over the world that will come to the United States and come to Portland and sign for 5 years. Go float a 5-year deal, and we're just throwing 5 years out as a number. It's not necessarily the number. It's just a long-term contract. Go to Argentina, go scout center backs number 10 through 25 in the overall list of top center backs in the Argentine Superliga. You're going to find plenty of them who would come to MLS for probably not even a targeted allocation money contract and a commitment of a 3 to 5 year deal. You don't have to go get Liam Ridgewell if he says no to that. That's the other side. The club can say, well, you don't want to play our game? Go sign somewhere else. You have to look at it from a business perspective.
Go get yourself an LGP.
Oh, geez, there's Jarrett Smith. It was a
glass-breaking sound effect.
Seriously, hold on one second, Jarrett. The deal with Portland and Liam Ridgewell, it was announced on January 10th, not 3 weeks ago, that Liam and Portland Timbers mutually agreed to part ways. So they let him walk, and they got nothing from Hull City. I don't think that's good business.
Terrible business.
Sometimes you got to play hardball.
It is. It's terrible business. I mean, get something. And at the same time, like, it's critical, the idea that, and I know this blew up last night. United Twitter got involved in this. In fact, MLS Twitter got involved in this about Giovinco and getting what you got for him in a matter of who has leverage and who doesn't. But, get what you can. I mean, a little bit of something's better than a whole lot of nothing. And that seems where you're at right now with Liam Ridgewell. And seriously, go get yourself an LGP. Go get yourself a center back from a South American country who may or may not be on the national team picture. But just because they're not playing in the Premier League and they don't have, tons of money next to their name on Transfermarkt, it doesn't define quality. Go scout. Go find guys who are values. Go find deals. Go find you a Franco Escobar kind of guy, even.
Well, the thing is that these aren't children we're talking about here. These are adults with representation. And if you approach it from a business perspective, they will respect that. And you say, look, you're a good player. We don't think that you're not a good player. We'd like to have you back here. But right now where we are financially, that doesn't work because, as we talked about earlier, there is this hard cap that we need to work with. But we've loved having you here. So let's have a mutually beneficial way to end this relationship so that you get where you want to go and we get, the what we need as well. That there's nothing wrong with having that conversation. And the player may tell you, Here's where you go, and here's the horse you can ride in on. But you need to start having those conversations. And in the end, it looks good because you show that it helps the player because it shows that you're a valued asset, that you weren't just let go on a free because you are a valued asset. And the team makes money in the process, even if it's crumbs. It's better than where you were previously.
It's setting a standard.
And setting a standard, absolutely, where you say this is a league that develops talent, and if you want this talent, you got to pay for it because there's no
Nick,
free ride.
Hold that thought, Nick. We have a little bit of breaking news. Not a surprise, but our friend Doug Robertson of the AJC reports that Atlanta United 2 has signed defender 19-year-old Guillermo Benitez on loan from Plaza Amador in Panama. I believe Benitez was on video saying that he was going to Atlanta United's subsidiary club, and that is Atlanta United 2. So Guillermo Benitez, 19-year-old Panamanian
good source.
International. Yeah, I mean, it's him. He said it. He's going to ATL UTD 2, and Doug Robertson just broke that on Twitter. All right, let's continue this conversation a little bit. Tafka says, let's discuss about Luciano Acosta. Jarrett, the latest update on Acosta is that the sides were $1.5 million apart. DC wanted $13 million. PSG was willing to go up to $11.5. There's also talk that Thomas Tuchel didn't really want Acosta. He wanted somebody else, but I don't know if you're going to get somebody else with, 45 minutes left in the transfer window. Tafka says this. Acosta's the same age as Miggy. Is he really half as valuable and as talented as Miggy? 11.5 is a good fee, but can we blame DC United for saying it's underpaying? No, I'm not saying that DC's wrong in this. They got it up to 11.5. I thought 10 was a good number here. But that was also before we knew the numbers on Miguel Almiron. And now it is a little bit different universe. I think they're different players. I do. I think Miguel is at another level from Luciano Acosta. I do. Is he twice as good? I don't know if you can compare the transfer fees from two different clubs and two different leagues and two different situations and put them on the same plane. I think Newcastle was up against it to a degree and had to pay and didn't have as much leverage. PSG, do they have to pay? I mean, Nick, you thought that they didn't even necessarily need Acosta. So maybe they don't have to spend $13 million. It's just different negotiating points.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, to me, with the Acosta deal is that if you look at Almiron, he won at Lanús, he won here in Atlanta, and his quality was, I mean, you can just sit, if you're the agent, you sit there and say, look, everywhere my client has gone, he's lifted silverware. So can you say the same thing for Acosta? No, because of his time at DC. And yes, it's not his fault that they didn't put a team around him that matched his ability, but it factors in. And there are teams that will use that leverage against you. And I think Acosta is a very good player. I don't think he's Miguel Almiron. And if you look at how Miguel plays and the fact that he is willing to drop back and be a part of a team defense, that he will hit the Jets and burn another team's defense on his own. To me, he is a more valuable player than Acosta. That's not saying Acosta is bad. That's not saying that Acosta doesn't have what it takes to succeed in a top tier league. But if I'm another team, I use every bit of leverage I can to get that price down. And keep in mind, again, as we talked about earlier, teams that work in concert with the players and the players' representation and teams that don't. And if Acosta went to DC and said, hey, I'm not doing this anymore, get me out of here, and DC's reluctantly along for the ride, Acosta may be telling DC, I'm not getting back on a plane.
Yeah.
So work this out.
Acosta has been unhappy since last season ended about that number.
Yeah.
He wanted a new deal. So that factors into this too. It's a big time poker game going on either in Paris or over Skype or over transatlantic phone calls between, of all clubs, DC United and Paris Saint-Germain. Who would have thunk that would have been happening right now?
It's wild. And you guys have touched on it. There's different sides of it in the sense that I get it from DC's side. Like, you look at what Acosta did last year when Rooney came in. I'd be asking for more than some people might think he's worth too, honestly. After the way everything worked and after the way all that clicked, not only are you trying to acquire one of my assets, you're trying to acquire an asset who was a firing pin in this super weapon for the second half of the season. At the same time, Paris Saint-Germain is going to be trying to get a deal out of this. There's still going to be all that perception about MLS. And I'd love to know what the difference is for Acosta's agent and for DC. Like, how far apart are they in terms of, here's what we're willing to pay you for you to be here and be happy and continue doing what you were doing with Wayne Rooney last year? What does it take for us to get back to the happy fun times that we had when, we were ripping Orlando's heart out like Temple of Doom style? It's a dance. There's like 5 people on the dance floor at once. None of them have shoes, and they're all doing a different dance and trying not to step on each other's feet while doing the Bird Box Challenge.
So here's the thing I'll go with Acosta when we talk about Acosta and Wayne Rooney. Is my question on that, if I'm another team, is who made who? Was Acosta that good, or did he require Wayne Rooney to be that good? And I go back, if you want to use a football analogy, Johnny Manziel and Mike Evans. Because Johnny Manziel would heave some passes up that he had Evans there to go get it. If it's anybody else other than Mike Evans, is that ball intercepted and Manziel's numbers tank? Probably. So again, who made who? Was it that Rooney was that good and elevated everyone's play around him? Because if you look at the record, it looks like that's the case. Or if you have somebody who is Acosta that, hey, I just had to have person X with me to get this train moving. So when you have that issue, it makes it a little more difficult to pitch Acosta as the better player. Meanwhile, with Miguel Almiron, when he wasn't on the field, you could tell that there was a difference. I mean, it was just a different team. And when you lose that speed, when you lose that vision and the passing ability that he has, it's evident. And he was mission critical to this side being MLS champions. So there's fewer questions and less risk in my mind with Miguel Almiron than there are with an Acosta. So that's how I would frame that argument if I were comparing the two and saying, okay, here's why Almiron got a higher valuation than Acosta. And not to mention that you have 2 different brain trusts with those organizations in DC and Atlanta. One who absolutely knows how to thrive in this market, and one in DC who does not know how to thrive in this market. So that's another thing you have to take into consideration.
Yeah, it definitely factors into it. Let's talk a little bit about Leandro Gonzalez-Pirez. This was something that Frank de Boer told Doug Robertson today. They were not going to consider a move for him, and that was what was reported in Argentina over the last couple of days. Frank de Boer said the Argentine is too crucial to the team in its quest to defend MLS Cup. The quote from de Boer is, "We have a replacement for Almiron, but not for Leandro. We don't have that many in central defense, especially the type he is. He's the killer." I love that quote. I absolutely love that quote right now.
You might not have a replacement for him in this league.
No, you don't. De Boer said the partnership LGP has with Parkhurst reminds him of the partnership that he had with Jaap Stam on Holland's national team. Stam was the enforcer. De Boer was more about precision. You need those qualities in the back. He's crucial in the back. We don't want to let him go. So that's where you're at. De Boer also said that if they're going to play with 3 in the back, he says they need one more center back. So we'll see what that means for Jeff Larentowicz, where he plays this season. We'll see what that means for Miles Robinson, where he plays this season. Or if you're just looking to add a Florentine Pogba, for example, for depth. And you can add Pogba anytime you want. He's out of contract, which makes it a little bit different conversation about transfer windows, but you've got till May to bring him in, so you can do that. LGP, mission critical to Atlanta United going into the season. I don't think we're surprised by this, but now, according to Doug's earlier reporting this week, LGP's in the last year of his deal. Committing to not transferring him here means I think you really need to figure out that contract as soon as you can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is a conversation that's absolutely going to end up taking place, and they have money to do it. It's not a concern. It's just dependent upon how much of a pay increase LGP and his agent feel like he's due, and what works for the team. We always talk about, well, we want to be the Patriots of MLS. Well, keep in mind that part of that is that Tom Brady keeps taking team-friendly deals so they can bolster out the rest of the roster. It's going to be interesting to see if LGP comes back and says, look, I want to be a DP, make me a DP. Well, obviously that's not going to happen. So it's going to be interesting to see how they work this out, but I have full faith that Atlanta United and LGP will work in concert to secure his rights for a couple of years at least until he gets that potential move back to Europe, which I think could happen. I think he has the ability and the talent. And under Frank DeBoer, you couldn't ask for a better manager for him to be under, because everybody was flipping out when DeBoer first came in saying, oh, no, Dutch total football. We're going to have defenders playing striker. Well, keep in mind who's the one who opened the account at MBS. Well, that was Leandro Gonzalez-Pirez. So you have a defender who can control the ball. You've seen him dribble from the back all the way up to the front, put himself in the scoring situation. He is mission critical for this team. And the more game tape we see of that and the more refinement he will receive from DeBoer, then you're going to see another asset who will be pitched to overseas teams. I think Serie A would be perfect for him. You will see another asset sold for a tremendous amount of money thanks to contract setup earlier in the game.
Well, let's talk about that contract, Jarrett. So if he's going into the last year of his contract, you're going to need to re-sign him. Defenders, and we'll leave Bastian Schweinsteiger out of it because you didn't sign him as a defender. You signed him as a midfielder. He's going to play some on the back line for Chicago at $6.1 million. The highest paid defender in the league is Michael Mancian with the New England Revolution. 1.3 is his total compensation.
Dead. I thought he was still laying on the field at Mercedes-Benz.
Wow. Jarrett coming back in with all the fire since he's missed most of the week.
I'm pretty sure he got murdered on our field.
Well, he still got paid $1.37 million last season, or prorated because he came in midway. That's your highest paid defender in the league. Rod Fanni in Montreal, 1.2. Then you're getting down to Jorgen Skjelvik, $1 million with the Galaxy. Andreu Fontas, who signed last season with Sporting Kansas City, just under $1 million. Claude Dielna, who is now in Portland, $909,000. Wow. First off, these are some poorly done contracts because we're not talking about the best defenders in the league. Wow.
Claude Dielna in 2019, the year of our Lord.
And let's say this, that I would believe Leandro Gonzalez-Pirez's agent would be looking at these numbers and saying, yes, Michael Mancian and Claude Dielna are making this kind of money. My client needs to make this kind of money. If he's at just under $700,000 right now, I think, tell me if you think I'm crazy, I think you can sign him, and again, to do what we've been talking about in terms of keeping that contract control, I think you could get him on $1 million plus, right around $1 million a year, maybe even a little bit more for 3 years.
Yeah, I'm thinking you can put him on a deal similar to what you have Tito Villalba on. You know, you're north of $1 million. We don't know if they've and how much they may have dipped into the TAM coffers, the voluntary TAM coffers. But I could see a world where you put him on a 7-figure deal and say, we're going to buy you down to, to a TAM deal. You ain't going to have DP next to your name, but you're going to be clearing 7 figures a year. So there's that. And I could see that working. One thing that would really make this work is if he finds himself into an Argentine national team camp. He finds himself on Argentina's national team, even in a camp, and even getting capped. If that starts happening, I think the chances of him leaving go down a lot.
Yes, and that's something that will be changing with Pity Martinez on hand in Atlanta now, who right now is part of the Argentine national team, and we'll see if he gets called in for games in March. You could see Pity Martinez and Argentina against Joseph Martinez and Venezuela in Spain in March. That could happen. That is one of the international friendlies on the docket for March ahead of Copa America this summer. One thing about Leandro that I think we all have to factor in, and Topka TLC is with me on around $1 million, 2 to 3 years. The thing that makes this a little different is he's 26. If he's going to go back to Europe, he would probably want to do it in the next year or two. I still think you want to sign him to a 3-year deal, minimum 3. You commit to that. If he sees out the contract here, okay, cool. But you have that control to be able to make a suitable transfer if it is there. Whether it's Argentina or Europe or wherever, if that's his goal to get back into the national team and he doesn't get called up, even with the additional eyes on Atlanta United due to Pity Martinez's arrival, well, that age is going to factor in on him in a different discussion than it would for some of the other players in this roster. So it's not going to be easy, but De Boer comparing him to Jaap Stam, I think that tells you how important he's going to be to Atlanta this season.
Yeah, and it's going to be the next level of his education. So it's one thing to learn under Tata Martino. It's another thing to learn from a guy who was an absolute legend at his position. So when you factor that in, and you have somebody like a Frank De Boer who can comment to this and say, "Look, I know quality center back. This guy is it. He's the deal." And you have a Tata Martino who can also chime in and say, "Yes, he is the deal." I think his chances improve dramatically. Now, we have to also factor in the fact that the Argentine national team has not been the absolute greatest with calling up the most talented players, and have somehow taken to calling up the best brand name that they can call. Like, oh, well, we have this guy over here. Well, why are you calling him in based on his age? We know what we're doing. No, you're not, because you haven't done that well internationally in a long time. So I'm hoping that with the regime change that's taking place there, that with Pity Martinez, that spotlight that he'll bring, that Leandro gets caught up in that. But I think there are teams in Italy that would take him 2 years from now, just because you have some teams that, I don't know if you're going to get the transfer valuation you want, but I think there are teams that would take him still in the next couple of years.
Okay, NBC Sports Network is now with the domestic crew talking transfer window, and they opened the show talking about Miguel Almiron and his move to Newcastle. I think it's the biggest move that has happened in England today. It's pretty crazy to see an Atlanta United player turn England on its head in this transfer window. Here's what NBC Sports Network had to say about Miguel Almiron.
It's just you worry, as all players, by the way, of a technical kind of type coming into the Premier League, is the intensity. I know the MLS is physical league, but this is physical plus speed. It's the speed of the game. That's what you have to deal with in the Premier League. And, of course, the amount of games and the week-in, week-out expectation of delivering performances.
Well, Carl, that's why it's quite interesting to ask you, having played in Major League Soccer and watched probably more Premier League football than most other people ever, how do you think he'll be able to adapt to that speed of play change?
Well, one challenge is he's in his off-season. So one challenge is getting up to speed literally. I mean, going from training on his own and finding clubs that he can stay fit, and now jumping into a situation where he's going to be expected to start right away. From what I know, and I've asked some players that have played with him, I've asked people who have been covering him, they've said that there's a player that works really hard. I mean, off the ball, this is a talented player with his left foot that can take you on, that can pick a pass, he can help you transition. But he also does the defensive side of things, and that's what Benitez will love. He went to Atlanta because of Tata Martino, and being Paraguayan, he loved the man. He learned so much under him. You'd think that Benitez picked up the phone and called Tata Martino. I would imagine that relationship is there where he could say, what am I getting? And that's so beneficial because they're getting a star player that I think is better than Murphy. He's got some Jose Perez qualities about him, and I think he plugs right into the team.
Well, there are reports that Murphy's out the door, possibly because of the arrival of Almiron.
So one correction to Kyle Martino's part of that. He's been training with Atlanta United for a couple of weeks since camp opened. And according to Jarrett, who's seen some of this training, he's looked pretty good. So, yeah, it's a couple of weeks. Yeah, I mean, it's a couple of weeks. It's not like mid-season form, but he hasn't been training on his own or finding somewhere to train. I think he is going to go straight into the team, though. I really do. I think that's why Rafa Benitez staked his future on it. You didn't bring him in to sit around. You brought him in to play. And, John, you had an update from the Chronicle that Newcastle had to move some pieces around and make some things happen to get this done.
Yeah, Mark Douglas from the Chronicle, as of about a half hour ago, Newcastle United took out a loan with Barclays to help fund recruitment in the January transfer window, but the club and third-party sources both insist there's nothing untoward about the arrangement, which is similar to the financial facility that many Premier League clubs enter into. They arranged the facility with Barclays, in effect, to advance them the PL Central prize money due toward the end of the January transfer window and the summer, and it appears, according to Douglas, it has been partly used to pay for the Almiron transfer fee and cover some costs.
Okay, so that's one reason why it took a little bit longer. Newcastle had to get some things in place to get this deal done, and they did. And it looks like he's not going to have the work visa to play this weekend. I don't know if things can change between now and Saturday. I don't know the process. The reporting is that he will not be in the team for Saturday because of the work visa issue. So we'll see how quickly he gets into the team, but I don't think this is we'll see how long it takes him. I think he's as soon as he's available, he's in the team. I don't think there's any question about that. We're still waiting on updates from Luciano Acosta and the whole situation in Paris around that. Two different stories are out there. One, the manager didn't want Luciano Acosta, he wanted somebody else. The sporting director and the manager were not on the same page. Other story is that DC United wanted $13 million. PSG was willing to go up to 11.5, and that's the impasse, $1.5 million. No updates as of yet from Soccer Insider or Pablo Maurer, who have both been all over the story from the DC United perspective. Pablo said, in my opinion, it's hard to see United turning down an $11.5 million transfer fee for Acosta. Frankly, I think they'd have taken a deal at 10. The idea that PSG killed the deal for a technical reason or because of a disagreement between the head coach front office is much more likely. Let's see. I would probably agree with that. I think if push came to shove and 11.5 is on the table for Luciano Acosta, I think DC takes it and runs. I don't see any way they say no to that. Maybe they're trying to play hardball. I don't know. Stephen
But
Goff.
you got to play the long game, especially if you're DC, if you want to operate in the world theater going forward, I would think.
Well, the long game ends in 27 minutes, John. There's not much of a long game anymore. That's the problem.
In the sense of in the sense that I'm saying that if they're not amenable to some kind of a middle ground with PSG here, any future deal that DC United might want to do in the future, people are going to be attached to the negotiations and how headbutting it was. What was the word that was used earlier this afternoon?
I can't remember.
Street fight or whatever?
Something like slugfest. There you go.
Slugfest. So do you want to be naturally tied to a team that is interested in slugfest or being tied to slugfest when it comes to negotiations in the future?
Well, that's a whole bunch of stuff that's mixed up. What start? Do you want? I don't know who's fighting. I don't know who is slugging and who's not slugging. If DC's slugging here, hey, more power to him. Cool. You're trying to get as much as you can for a player who has made it clear for months that he wants a new contract, and it sounds like you don't want to give it to him. DC also has leverage because if they get this deal done for Luciano Acosta, they're going to turn around some of that money, go to Villa Sarsfield and say, bring Yamil Assad back to the nation's capital, and there you go. There's your replacement. You're good to go. You're in a good spot if you're DC United with that. Now,
That could be a
the
fun
part about
story.
well, yeah, it could. And Pablo Maurer did tweet that earlier that, by all accounts, if this gets done, it will immediately result in Yamil Assad coming back to Washington. The part, John, you said about DC United's reputation going forward, I think this is different because I don't think anybody at this time yesterday would have expected $10 million for Luciano Acosta from PSG in their right mind.
No.
At all. So if you're able to take it to 11.5, and yeah, you got a little bit of time to play hardball, but you're amazing. You have pulled off the negotiating coup of a lifetime if you're able to get this for a player that was not mentioned to PSG at this time yesterday. So you can play some hardball here, but if you take 11.5 and you wanted 13, you won. You won everything, crown them. DC United won this round because I think it's a more shocking deal than Atlanta getting 27 for Miguel Almiron. I really do, because this was never talked about until about 10:30 last night. That's what's amazing about it.
I love that this is happening because I love transfers like this in the same sense that I like baseball trades that just literally come out of hammer space. Like a GM reaches behind his back and pulls out some just brain-numbing, blockbuster trade where we've been talking about Almiron, we've been talking about this, we've been talking about that. Oh, by the way, here's Acosta for like possibly $11.5 million going to one of the most, one of the deepest pocketed clubs in the world. No big deal here. Y'all didn't notice that. No big deal. Just casually dropping a possibly blockbuster transfer. I love when things like this happen because eventually I get just kind of worn out, I think, by just the transfer drama saga. And it's fun to follow it every day. But sometimes I like kind of getting hit in the face with a mallet that's pulled from behind hammer space.
This is a shocking one. Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, and so when we talk about Acosta to PSG, and I'm fully ready for the burning death of my timeline when I say this.
Uh-oh.
Let's say, in theory, Acosta goes to PSG. The deal gets done, and he goes there and he plays against like a Monaco or a Marseille, and he lights it up. This could end up being bigger than the Miguel Almiron deal, not from a financial standpoint, but from a prestige standpoint, because PSG is one of the top. It is in the upper echelon of super clubs. I love Newcastle. Newcastle is not a small club, but it's not a super club. And if Miguel can keep them from relegation and he can move them up the table, it is titanic. It is a monumental thing. But if an MLS player can move to a club, gain normal playing time with Cavani, with Di Maria, even with Neymar, if he can somehow sort that midfield out, that's galactic. That's a galactic shift in mindset for a lot of people, because it's not just Miguel slotted into a team that was facing relegation and saved them. No. It is an MLS player who slotted in and thrived amongst giants. And that's why this deal could be, if done, a monumental shift for MLS, not just from a financial standpoint, but from a reputation standpoint, which could be even more important down the line because it could lead to more massive moves.
Yeah, this is a next level kind of thing. I think a lot of people in this hemisphere have understood that Miguel Almiron is a talent, a special talent, would end up in Europe. It's not a surprise. And maybe the amount of money is a surprise to some. It's not a crazy, crazy surprise. Darren Eales called his number. He got pretty close to it. This is one that's out of nowhere. He's a best 11 player, just like Miguel Almiron, but he was never at Boca linked to these types of moves. Miguel Almiron was linked to moves to Europe at Lanús. This is a player who came to MLS on a loan with an option to buy and performed really well. DC made the purchase and now could turn a pretty ridiculous profit on it if they're able to pull this off. He's in Paris. Again, this is, I think, something that you have to keep in mind here. This is not just, well, this might happen. This could happen. He left DC United's training camp, flew across the Atlantic. He's in Paris. That makes you feel like it was pretty close to being done last night. Close enough to get on a plane. If you're down now to 20 minutes and $1.5 million apart, if that part is true, I would think you can find a way to get this deal done. I don't think DC should walk away from this. I don't.
Yeah, I don't think
it
they
looks
will.
like Manchester City might be coming out of lane 8 along with another Premier League.
No, I don't know how much to buy that. I don't know where you saw that. Let me know the source, because I saw one that I didn't believe. Manchester City
Evening News.
Okay, no, that's a good source. They were linked yesterday by Stephen Goff. They haven't really been mentioned today.
To turn that around, though.
Yeah, that's the part for me. How quickly are they going to be able to pull that off? Now, one thing that Goff reported earlier that we have to keep in mind, and I'm going to trust him on this, he did a medical in Paris. Goff made it abundantly clear to say that this was not a medical for PSG. It was a medical done in Paris that would be accepted by anyone in Europe. And remember earlier I said that he did a medical at Clairefontaine. That is the headquarters of the French national team. So it's a credible place for him to do his medical and to be approved, and that would be accepted by any club. So if they've been negotiating, and you're down to 19 minutes now, if they've been negotiating, you've got an approved medical from Clairefontaine on Luciano Acosta, you don't have to worry about that side of it, because we've seen deals happen in that case, where you got guys like running out of cars or helicopters to go in and see the doc. You should have that part handled, and it sounds like that was thought of by Luciano's representatives that, hey, we need to make sure he could go wherever. So Manchester City was mentioned initially. Now the Manchester Evening News is saying that they could be back in the mix. Another Premier League team could be in the mix. I don't think they're going to be able to get a work permit because he's not an Argentine national team player. I think they would have to buy him to loan him and then try to get him in. I don't know what his EU status is. A lot of Argentines are able to get a passport through Italian heritage most often. We don't know if that's the case for Luciano Acosta.
Yeah, the way the Italian citizenship works. Oh, somebody's a robot. Hold on.
John turned into a robot again.
So the way that Italian citizenship works is that if you have a direct line from Italy that's uninterrupted, meaning that you have a great-grandfather who did not declare U.S. citizenship, in our case, or Argentine citizenship in Acosta's case, then you can file for dual citizenship. And if you have that capability, then you can get an EU. It's pretty easy actually to get an EU passport. If all you have to do is just get the legwork done. But if Acosta can get that, then the only thing holding this deal up would be DC saying, okay, we accept your terms. Because if he can get the EU passport or prove that he can get an EU passport and he passes his medical, then it is interesting to me that the medical took place at the French Federation and not with PSG, because that makes me think that this is more player pushed than just a club calling him in. So that's the one thing, that's the detail to keep in mind here. That tells me that the agent and player got on a plane because there was probably interest and then said, hey, we're just going to get medical either way.
We have an update, and Stephen Goff retweeted it. Paul Kennedy from Soccer America had it. L'Equipe de Sour, this is L'Equipe's evening talk show, breaks down the Acosta to PSG hang-up, suggests issue isn't transfer fee, but rather gross versus net. Gilles Favard says Acosta's agent, Matthias Sabag, brought in Geneva-based agency to find French club, and dispute is over who pays it. Okay, let's introduce a new element to this, Nick. We've seen these brokers come into play where an agent brings in a broker to try to get a deal done. Mm-hmm. That sounds like, and where you were at with Clairefontaine, that sounds like what's happening here. The player wanted out. The agent maybe didn't have the connections to get it done. He hired somebody to go get it done, and now you're trying to figure out who pays who and how.
Yep. So this is, again, a situation where the club, the player, and the representation are not on the same page, where you have a player and a representative, in this case, representatives, who
multiple
have engineered a deal, and the club is trying to play catch up at this point. So in this case, where you have who gets what and how, this would not be the first time that a deal like this has been altered or messed up because of representation. When you look at Malcolm, when he was supposed to be going to Roma, he was on a plane. Roma said, hey, look, we have paperwork ready to go. No big deal. Fans were at the airport, and his representatives brokered a move to Barcelona. Malcolm was just like, I guess, okay, I'll go to Barca, no problem. And he ended up at Barcelona, and Roma was left at the airport wondering what happened. So agents have tremendous pull when it comes to transfers and where players go. And especially a situation like this where you have a player who just says, just get me out of DC, I want to go to Europe. Well, you're casting a pretty wide net. And like you just said, Jason, if his agent doesn't have the connections and you bring in a third party.
Yes, that's the key.
It becomes a little dicey. So this could be something that I think will get sorted because everyone's going to want money. And the only way they get money is if the deal gets done. So someone along the line will say, okay, I'll take a little less money to ensure that this happens. So I think the deal gets done. It's just a matter of it's going to get up to the razor wire to see which agent caves first.
I agree. If that's the issue, as reported on L'Equipe's talk show, if it is down to who pays the agency, and that's the part here where Favard on the talk show says Acosta's agent, Matthias Sabag, brought in a Geneva-based agency to find a French club for Luciano Acosta. The dispute is over who pays it. That, the way I'm reading it, is deal's done, everything's agreed upon. Who's paying the agency that made the link? Is it the player or is it the club? That's the question here. And that seems to be, we're down to technical stuff, and you would think that no one would want to take 0% of zero. They would want to take as much as they can get of the amount that you're going to get this deal done for. I don't think this is going to hold it up either, Nick. I'm kind of with you. I think if this is the case, that can be sorted out.
Yeah, it's something where some agent finally goes, okay, fine. And I have, or somebody along the line just says, okay, I'll take a smaller piece of the pie. And when that happens, the deals get, wrapped up very quickly. And I think one thing to keep in mind is if and I don't know if it's the same way in Ligue 1 as it is in England, but theoretically, if they have paperwork already done and they're just working out little details like this, then it can go past the deadline. But it's something that it could play a factor is if they have everything else done except something like this, I think. But I think the deal is going to be done. Let's just put it there outside of technicalities and say, I think the deal is done. And if true, this is probably the greatest day in MLS history. I think even more so than just Beckham.
This is nuts. This is nuts. I am scrolling through the Luciano Acosta search on Twitter, and it is John
watching Sky Sports.
Okay, so John's checking Sky Sports. You might have to get L'Equipe. You might have to find a bootleg stream of L'Equipe's show while you're at it, and learn French while you're at it, because I'm trying to learn French reading Twitter timelines right now, and it's
translate tweets.
Well, there's one like, oh, it's not going to happen. This is why. Then there's another from 9 minutes ago about the Tuchel and sporting director not on the same page. Then you've got the technicalities of it. I mean, it is nobody knows. Nobody.
Dogs and cats living together.
You have to try to follow it as best as you can in real time, and I think we have it as we currently know. There was a report about Tuchel and the sporting director. Then there was a report about being $1.5 million apart. Now there's a report that it's not about all of that as much as it is who's paying the agency that brokered the deal outside of the player's agent. That's what L'Equipe is saying it's down to now. Maybe that's the $1.5 million difference that was reported elsewhere. Maybe things got lost in translation a bit.
About 10%.
I don't know. So, this is wild. Could you imagine Jarrett being in the room, in the situation room at DC United right now, while this is trying to get
11
done?
minutes left. Yeah. Yeah, that's. Somebody's going to leave that room tonight thinking, I just saved my job, or I should update my LinkedIn account. I mean, that's where we're at with it. My question for DC is like, okay, let's say this does happen. And as Stephen Goff put it out Yamil Assad. Some of that money being brought to bring Yamil Assad back.
Pablo Maurer had that
Yamil,
from The Athletic.
Pablo Maurer, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
If Pablo's right, and it's Yamil coming back, congratulations, little one. You are now one of the man in D.C. You're going to have to rise to the occasion, and you're going to have to be on it every single game, and you're going to have some shoes to fill. I'm not saying you can't fill it. I love Yamil Assad, but it's going to be a different role, and it's going to be, you're not going to have Acosta to lean on. You're going to have to be that guy who establishes that relationship with Rooney, and it's going to be different. He's a different kind of player.
Well, you're going to have Lucas Rodriguez to lean on too. Don't forget his addition.
True, but I mean,
I think he becomes the Acosta in that scenario.
I trust Yamil to be, because of the previous relationship that he would have had with Rooney. I trust him to already have something established. But you're going to have a heavier load on you, even as good as Lucas Rodriguez could be. And we saw clips of him last year when he was theoretically tied to Atlanta with all that jazz last year, and we liked what we saw about him. But until we see it on the field, I'm heaping more pressure in Yamil Assad's corner. Is Zoltan Stieber still on roster there, or did they?
He is. No, he's still there. Yeah, he's going to be a key part of it right now. Yeah. If right now if Acosta goes and Assad doesn't come back, Stieber and somebody's got to play on the wing. So you've got some questions. I think it's a no-brainer. If you do this deal, you then flip money over to Yamil Assad and get that deal done and bring him in. I think that's an easy no-brainer.
Love for somebody else from MLS to reach out. Hey, Yamil, come here instead. Just make DC run the price up.
But
there is always that.
Here's something to consider. They've got to get Acosta back on a plane if this doesn't work, and convince him to play for DC
of his own free will.
Well, and remember, there was an offer. Now that's a great point, because earlier this week there was an offer from a Saudi Arabian club for $6 or $6.5 million, and the club turned it down. Well, now you're talking about a whole different planet for Luciano Acosta if you're talking about 11.5, 13 million from a PSG. Saudi Arabia's window is still open through February 4th. I think he gets on the plane, but I don't think it's back to DC United's camp. I think then that agency is going to say, okay, hello Portugal, hello Saudi Arabia, hello UAE, whatever other clubs are out there that the window's still open,
Russia.
Could spend 10, 11, $12 million. That's where you're going to go. Russia would be interesting. Russia does bring in a number of South American players. That's pretty common. We haven't seen many players from MLS go to Russia. I don't know what Shakhtar's finances are right now in the Ukraine. The last one I can think of was Damani Ralph from the Chicago Fire. I think he was Rookie of the Year. And he went to Russia, and nobody ever heard from him again. It just did not go well. Ended his Jamaican national team career. He just fizzled out.
Yeah, Russia's not a place you want to go if you can avoid it at all costs.
I think if you've got a Saudi Arabian club that was already willing to go to 6.5, can you get them to 10 after the PSG interest? I would say I think so. And that's probably what you'd be doing. And you have an agency who's trying to make this happen.
Yeah, and if you're Acosta, keep in mind that in Russia, a lot of players don't live in the towns that they actually play for. They actually fly in from other locations, because who wants to live out in Midwest Siberia, to play for a club? No thanks. But the oil money's there, and they can make deals happen. But there are very, very rarely any positive stories come from playing in Russia. But yeah, I think you're 100% correct. If he's going to be on a plane, it won't be to DC, but he'll be on a plane, unless they can convince his agent that they somehow can get a deal done for him for the same price range in the summer window. But I highly, highly doubt that's going to happen.
Yeah, it feels like once you get on that plane and you go across, you're not coming back at this stage with it being this close. Nick, you hit on a point, and John, I don't know if you saw this earlier. I thought Sky Sports did an excellent job of breaking it down. The process in England, it could be different than France, but basically you have to get a term sheet in before the window closes. Then in England, for international transfers, you have another hour to get all the details sent over, all the paperwork sent over. For domestic transfers, you have 2 hours. If France is on a similar format, like that term sheet is basically a one-sheeter of we are doing X, you are doing Y, we all agree, here you go, French Federation, French League, whatever, done. And then you can get the contract in those particulars, like Nick said, of which party is paying the agency who is brokering this. You can do that separate. You have a little more time if you agree on enough to get the term sheet in. Correct?
Yeah, that's the key. Is
That's
that
the
there have been
England
times
process.
the England process, and there have been times where transfers have been 14 seconds too late.
Yes.
And because the term sheet wasn't a part of it, transfer was off. So the key, if something happens after Big Ben chimes at the top of the hour, it's the term sheet.
Yeah, and this is the process in England. We don't know if that is the exact same in France. I would assume that that's a fairly simple way of doing business that would be pretty consistent. It makes a lot of sense. It gives you a little bit of leeway to work on some of these details. So, yeah. I am like refreshing to see if anything new comes out of the French topics or out of Soccer Insider, Stephen Goff, or out of Pablo Maurer. Nothing as
Still
of
watching
yet.
Sky.
We're a couple minutes away. I think Sky's got other stuff. I don't know how deep they're going to go into this.
They're doing the quick rounds of all of the grounds if anybody's doing anything late before they get to Big Ben.
Well, Stephen Goff at 5:48 tweeted, Geiger checking his watch shows a yellow to PSG for time wasting. So I don't know how connected Goff is here.
We're gonna have to stop making fun of him and shift it to Baldomero Toledo. That's gonna be. I'm gonna start throwing my vegetables at him.
Oh, Baldy.
Geiger earned his stripes between the massacre that was a World Cup game against England, and then the way he handled the playoffs. Geiger earned his stripes. Let the man retire in peace.
Yeah. I think we might have to have a referee preview for the upcoming season here at some point on the STH network. We're down to that point here. The window's about to close officially. We don't know what.
Or in Italy, the door could close.
The door closed in Italy a while ago. It's closed.
Literally, they closed the door. Well,
Sky did.
Honestly, in the office, they actually did close a door in Italy.
In London, in the Sky network. It wasn't. I don't think they had a video of a door in Italy, a random door, a special door. Do they have a special door in Italy, Nick? You would know.
I honestly don't know. That's something I imagine. Seven Gold is probably going absolutely nuts right now. So I would love to have that feed.
Nick, does the transfer timeline run about as late as the trains do, and the buses and everything else?
It's on Big Ben.
I mean, in Italy, Italy runs on its own time.
Italy runs on its own time, but it's one of those deals where the transfers are generally well known because there's so many damn leaks across the board.
I love that country so much. I love everything about you, Italy.
Amen.
45 seconds.
Here we go.
Well, I don't think we're going to get an announcement because I don't think PSG is going to time a tweet.
No,
with,
45 seconds
clocks.
to term sheets.
Yeah, in England. We don't know what the term sheet equivalent is in France, and that's really what we're down to for this window for MLS. A potential blockbuster move of Luciano Acosta going to PSG. It is somewhere between $1.5 million, the manager and the sporting director being on the same page, and who's paying the agency that helped Acosta's agent broker the deal. One of those three things, or all three of those things, have factored into a deal not being announced as of yet. It's been a slugfest, according to Stephen Goff at the Washington Post. And it might continue to be a slugfest. I mean, maybe a sheet's in Stephen Goff tweets, "It's 6 p.m. Do you know where your Lucho is?" Maybe. Some people do.
You know
I
where
think
your
his
term
agent
sheet
does.
is.
I think
Do you
the
know where Lucho
agency
is
that
going?
is trying to broker a deal, I think that's the better question. Do we know where Lucho is going? And we don't, because that's where we're at right now. France and PSG, they haven't added anybody else. And that was one part of this that came into play that we talked about early in the show. Were they going to go in a different direction? They have not. At least they haven't announced anything. So,
well, they're pretending to go along with financial fair play right now, which is the key thing here. So they're pretending to go along with it until they can find some reprieve. But there have been rumor players coming and going, and it hasn't really amounted to much. But I don't think this is a deal that they have to do. I think it's not. Move. But I also think that if all you're haggling over is this, I think the deal should get done. But then again, I'm the person who previously said that Almiron will no way end up in Newcastle because Ashley's wallets are too tight. So, and he gets a deal done with Barclay. So, stranger things have happened.
Yeah, I wonder if he had to give up the rights to laser discs to get that deal done.
Not worth
Zubaz
it, but
pants.
okay.
Yeah, he might have had to forever give up the rights to sell laser discs in the United Kingdom to get that loan from Barclays to get this deal done.
Interesting.
What do we have?
Newcastle outbound. Roland Aarons and Ashraf Lazar have joined Sheffield Wednesday from Newcastle on loan till the end of the season. And Jacob Murphy, who seemed like he was going to be the odd man out with the pickups with Miguel Almiron, Newcastle's Jacob Murphy's joined West Brom on loan to the end of the season.
Clears more room for Miguel to go straight into the lineup. I think that question is answered. As soon as he has his work visa, he is going to play for Newcastle United with Murphy going out. That seems to be logical. Sam Snyder with a great point on Twitter talking about the slugfest between DC United and PSG. He says the kind of slugfest in which every time DC says no to something, PSG hits them in the face with a bag of cash. Yeah, I think that's it. I think it's that kind of slugfest.
That's it.
The idea that PSG is in a fight with DC United over $1.5 million is just awe-inspiring to me. This is PSG we're talking about. $1.5 million, just when I think about them, doesn't seem like an amount of money they would give, two dams about.
I mean,
but I understand why, and it's good business to be haggling. But it's not what I associate PSG with just because they have been so loose with the wallet.
It's either $1.5 million or they're trying to decide who pays the equivalent of Cam Newton's dad. That's basically where we're at.
Ooh.
I had to take it.
Hey,
it
at least Cam Newton delivered a championship.
That's true. Can Luciano Acosta deliver a championship to PSG? We'll have to wait and find
Luciano
out.
Acosta scores.
Got all other competitions. They need him.
Luciano Acosta goes into the lineup in the Champions League. That is what could happen here if the deal gets done. How mind-blowingly crazy is that after last night at 6 o'clock, we were waiting on the Miguel Almiron deal to get announced. We knew it would happen at some point early in the day. We knew Giovinco was unhappy. We didn't know that was going to get done. And in the span of about an hour, Toronto officially transferred Sebastian Giovinco to Saudi Arabia, and then Stephen Goff dropped the bomba that Luciano Acosta was going to France to work on a deal, and now it has been slugfest after slugfest after slugfest. And we're waiting to see if Luciano Acosta is going to join a team in the Champions League now. That's where we're at.
Luciano Acosta is Michael Dyer in this scenario. Let's go.
Interesting.
But again, it goes back to what could be done for MLS here.
Mm-hmm.
If you have Acosta, and if he plays 2 minutes in a Champions League game
against Manchester United in the round of 16, February 12th, that's the first leg.
DC United can go into any living room in South America and be like, yeah, Atlanta sent somebody to Newcastle. We put a kid in the Champions League. Who do you want to talk to?
Yeah.
and they'll be right.
Yep. So you're telling me that if this deal happens, and we're trying to find updates, we are efforting, and we'll stay on until we have some kind of an idea of what's going on in France, or at least be able to refer you to L'Equipe's show if we can find it for you. You're telling me that Ben Olsen would then be able to strut into every living room in South America like Vince McMahon,
which is absolutely frightening. But yes,
that's what would happen here.
Yeah, because he could do it. Because again, it's if you walk in, Atlanta United can walk into, Vicky Martinez and say, "Look what we did. Look what we're doing with Almiron here." Because they can talk insider baseball together, the stuff that we're not going to hear about. Okay, good, awesome, yeah, you're absolutely a team with the ambition that I want to come play for. Talking point. But Ben Olsen can then walk in behind and say, "Hey, man, we put Acosta in the Champions League. You think you're a better player than Acosta? Yeah? Oh, okay, great. Why don't you come here and we'll do the same for you?"
Yeah. Okay,
the
Jarrett.
game is to be sold, not to be told.
Yes. Jarrett, we did not get a chance to get into this, and while we're efforting on Luciano Acosta updates, Celtic, your boys, made a couple moves that are interesting. So there you go. They signed 2 young Americans, and these were 2 deals that we expected, Andrew Gutman and Manny Perez. But they signed them for the future. They signed them and loaned them. Gutman will be in Nashville this season. Perez will be at North Carolina FC. What are your thoughts?
I'm all excited about it. I'm glad we get a chance to see them here, selfishly speaking. Gutman comes, especially, and Perez is a U20 international, I believe. Gutman comes, with that flair that comes with the trophy at Indiana. I want to see how it translates, because the trophy and all the stats in college, they mean precisely nothing right now, because now it's the real deal. You're going to USL, and you do well here. You signed a contract originally with a team that, yes, Scotland is a really top-heavy league. It's incredibly physical. It's incredibly cold and, vicious at times, but it's incredibly top-heavy. You're also going to get a chance at European football if you're there. But first, you gotta show me what you can do here, and I like that, because I don't know really. They made moves in the window. I don't know really what room you would have for them to get time over there. So I'm glad they're over here at USL, out of college. Now let's see what they can do, rather than do it here than go play in Scotland's second division, or sitting on the bench in Glasgow. Literally frozen to the bench on a cold Scottish winter. I'm glad they're getting a chance to play, and they're not just being buried on the bench there, like players have in the past up in Glasgow.
Okay, so we have an update from Stephen Goff. It's not really much of an update. It appears no deal was struck between DC and PSG, but awaiting confirmation and details. And if no deal, what happens with Acosta now and in long term in Washington? It's back to Nick's thought that, yes, there is no return trip to DC United training camp for Luciano Acosta. I think this agency out of Geneva is going to be working late into the night.
Yeah, and Pablo Mala comes in and says, those of you who are suggesting Acosta will resent DCU for this deal potentially falling apart, etc., this dude is happy in DC and is in line to get a huge payday from United. Obviously, he'll be massively disappointed, but his value just increased exponentially. That's according to Pablo Mala.
100%. Completely agree with that. And I don't know, the relationship there outside of the tweets we saw earlier on in the offseason that he wanted a new deal. And there's been talk. This would be interesting as to, okay, what do you do here? Acosta's agent brought in an outside agency to try to broker a deal. You got really close, and you had some big numbers attached to your client. Though everybody knows those numbers now. All right, that changes the conversation a bit. Now, do you go back to DC and say, all right, you know what my value is now. You know what a club in the Champions League was willing to pay for me. Pony up. Pay me. And then you can make that money, but pay me because you know what my value is. Or does the agent and the agency say, well, we had 6.5 on the table in Saudi Arabia. Can we get 10, 11, 12? Let's go try. This is going to be an ongoing thing if it doesn't get done in France, because I don't know, because of hiring that outside agency, John, I think that's the thing that changes it for me. That shows a lot of intent on the agent's part, and by proxy, the player, to leave.
Yep. And that, to me, is the hook in all of this, is hiring the broker to try to figure out a home for Luciano Acosta. And that PSG was interested, even though we don't know the level of angst and anger that Thomas Tuchel had, that it was an outside deal and he was told last minute. Putting that aside, the fact that PSG was in a discussion, or is in a discussion, for the final 48 minutes or whatever of their window, getting to that broker, to me, is that last bit that Acosta doesn't want to come back, or he comes back on the escalated terms that were thought about in France. But then what does that do to the locker room coming back? That he just jets from training, goes to France, sits there and says, I'm good. I want to apply my trade here. Nothing happens, and then you come back.
I don't think that's as much of an issue. I really don't. I think players generally, he didn't miss any games. He's not hurting them in any kind of competition right now. I don't think players are going to begrudge him for this opportunity. I really don't. By all accounts, I think he's a pretty well-liked guy in the locker room. I don't think that changes. I just don't think he wants to come back. I think the outside agency coming into play is the game changer. I wouldn't worry about him fitting back into the team. I just don't think he wants to. I think you get this close to this deal, if there is an offer out there that DC will take. And now that's another part of it that we don't necessarily know. If they agreed on 11.5 or 13 or somewhere in between, and whatever hung up the deal, is there another club, whether it's Portugal or the Middle East, who says, or Russia, who says, we'll give you that amount? I think DC takes it. But is there another club that would give them the same amount? That's the question, and we don't know.
That's the key.
Well, also keep in mind that if DC did everything humanly possible to get this over the line, and it's evident that that's the case.
Yeah, it absolutely sounds like it.
So to me, that would be saying, okay, Acosta, we understand, you want to go, that's fine. We'll help make it happen. And this got hung up because of some agent issue. Then the question does become, what does DC do next? I think this ball is more in DC's court than it is anyone else's. Because if DC comes in and says, okay, it didn't work, here's our new terms that we're going to give to you based on the fact that, yes, you do have value. Yes, a club came looking for you from Europe. Let's talk Turkey here. If they do that and they treat him like a king, then I think, walking myself back here, maybe he does get on a plane. But I think if you're over there, you already have both agent people, either the firm and the actual representative himself, trying to make something happen. This is not over yet, so there could be a Saudi Arabian deal coming right around the corner. We don't know. But.
Yeah, here's the question. So January 25th, there was a report over to MLS Soccer. It was playing off of a Stephen Goff report in the Washington Post that DC and Luciano Acosta were negotiating over a long-term contract. This is a week ago. This is last Thursday in the Washington Post. DC United, Luciano Acosta's agent, are in talks concerning a long-term contract for the Argentine midfielder whose deal expires after this season. This is a recurring thing we are learning. Wanted to get it done before the opener. Last year, he earned $550,000 in base salary, $652,000 in guaranteed compensation. That put him fourth on the team behind Rooney, Stieber, and Paul Areola. That's really all the details. So they were negotiating a long-term deal last week. Week later, he's in France with an agency shopping him. I'd love to know how those negotiations have been going, if that is what happens in a week. My guess is that they have not been going well enough to say, hold up, we got you, we're going to take care of you. I don't think you let him leave camp, and I don't think his agent hires an outside agency to try to get a deal done, if that's the case, because his agent's given up money to get that outside deal done. Of course, he's hoping it's going to be a big deal, but agents don't generally like to cut other people in on deals. And in this case, that's happened, at least according to reports. So Daniel Graham had a question. What did Acosta do in D.C. Prior to Rooney? Luciano Acosta is a top player in this league. Over 3 seasons, he played over 30 games in each of the 3 seasons, scored 18 goals, 33 assists. 2018 was his best year, definitely. 10 goals, 17 assists. But he had 11 assists in 2016 on a not-so-great D.C. United team. 2017 on a very bad D.C. United team, 5 goals, 5 assists. He's one of the best dribblers in the league. I think he's a best 11 player. I thought he was that before Wayne Rooney showed up. Was he a PSG player for $11.5 or $13 million? No, I wouldn't have said that yesterday. I would not have. And I wonder if you have a lot of agents of MLS players who are calling up Luciano Acosta's agent right now and asking for a connection to this agency in Geneva that got PSG to the table with an 8-figure bid. Because I would be. Because, wow, that's some negotiating right there.
And that's fine and good if, but yeah, he this goes back earlier. Is Acosta really half Miguel's value? There are more questions to answer here with Acosta than you do with Almiron. Had this been, the situation reversed, I think that the deal probably gets done. But again, I don't think that PSG is negotiating from a position of weakness. They can sit there and say, either this gets done or it doesn't. We really don't care.
Okay, we have an update. Okay. This is from Jonathan Johnson, the PSG correspondent for ESPN. Will not join PSG in January. A source has confirmed to ESPN FC. Thomas Tuchel demanded attacking reinforcement to cover Neymar's injury absence. Earlier on Thursday, ESPN FC reported that Acosta was set to join PSG. That will no longer be the case, sources have confirmed. According to a source, PSG had agreed to the move in principle with DC United with an offer of less than €10 million and agreed to meet the player's personal terms. The source added that Acosta had left DC's training camp and was scheduled to arrive in Paris on Thursday for his medical. And it just fell apart. They don't really have any explanation of how it fell apart. So you'd agreed to €10 million, less than €10 million. That's what, $11-12 million?
Yeah.
So less
it's
than
like 1.15, so yeah.
Okay, so less than 11.5. Okay, so those numbers match up with some of the other reporting. They'd agreed to this. They'd agreed to the player's personal terms, which would have been that long-term contract that he's been seeking for DC. Then, okay, you do have another little bit of an update. Despite concerns over his diminutive build, he's short. He's 5'2" or 5'3". Despite concerns over his diminutive build with Ligue 1, a competition known for its physicality, the source indicated that Tuchel and his staff had given their blessing to the move for the Argentine. That's opposite of what some other reports had been, which was seen as a cost-effective way of filling the gap created by Neymar's recent injury as efforts continue to land another defensive midfielder. Something fell apart. ESPN FC does not have an update as to what fell apart, but they say that it was agreed upon and everything was done. And obviously it was agreed upon enough for him to fly across the Atlantic Ocean and show up in Paris.
And let's look at it from this point of view here, going off of this last report that Tuchel agreed to it as a cost-effective measure to reinforce the team. Where did Tuchel come from before this?
Yes, I believe it's a club in Germany called Borussia Dortmund.
Yeah. Who are kind of known for unearthing talent from random places, developing
Like
it, building
Pennsylvania.
it, and shipping it out for an absurd amount of money. So if this is the case, then this gives you an idea of the mindset going forward of, hey, look, we have no problem with the fact that he's coming from a place like MLS.
Mm-hmm.
We're good with that. Now, I want to see where this fell apart, because if this fell apart on DC's end, that changes the whole narrative for Acosta and this whole he loves DCU thing. Because if it fell apart on their end, then they're keeping him from living his dream of playing in Europe. He's going to be very, very angry. So, good on Tuchel for taking a club like PSG and saying, hey, look, we're open to a non-traditionally sourced player, bringing that sort of Dortmund mindset with him. And if that's the case, then, this would certainly not rule out any sort of moves in the future. And keep in mind, they have one Mr. Weah, who they've loaned out at the moment, who they haven't sold him. They loaned him. Look for some. They're open to American source talent. So just keep that in mind for future transfer windows.
Oh, hell,
Yeah.
I wonder if they'll recall Weah at some point.
Yeah, you wonder what the terms of that are. That is a bit
They
of a
didn't get any-
question.
They didn't get any. They didn't. It doesn't sound like they got the backup they might have been looking for. I wonder if the way has scored, I believe, 2 goals in 3 games. I wonder if they might say, "Hey, you know what? Just kidding. We're going to need him back."
And you might. With the injury to Neymar, you might. We'll see on that end of it. Pablo Maurer tweeted a little bit ago, Lucho Acosta to PSG is 100% off. That much I can confirm. Lots of rumors swirling out there about why. When I know something confidently, you'll be the first to know. MLSist on Twitter, if you are wondering what happened, because I think we all are. And what's next? That's the biggest part of this to me is, man, this is a weird spot for things to fall apart. Dude's in Paris. Outside agency came in to broker the deal. It didn't get done. Now what? Does he go sign that long-term deal with DC? Does he chase a deal in Portugal or Russia or the Middle East? There's a lot of questions. And we don't know how it fell apart. And that's, I think, a key part of it, as Nick said. If this is a situation where DC did something wrong, or the player did something wrong, or PSG said, no, we're not going to do this, we don't know. We don't know how it fell apart. But just the fact that we just spent about 2.5 hours talking about the possibility of Lucho Acosta ending up playing in the Champions League at PSG, deal didn't get done, but I think it does have an effect on the types of moves MLS could see down the line. I think it opens up some eyes about, hey, PSG was willing to spend this type of money on a player from MLS. That's a big deal. It's not as big as Miguel Almiron. It's not as big as if the deal got done, but I think it does have an effect on this next transfer window in the summer, which could be very, very interesting for MLS.
Yeah, because if you have a team like PSG that says, yeah, we're willing to spend $10 million, other teams will look at that and say, wait. They rated a player at $10 million from MLS. Hold up. Scouting department. Go check out MLS and see what we can get here. And keep in mind
one thing before you go, Nick. One thing. Before Alphonso Davies, you had one player sell for $10 million in MLS history, period. Josie Altidore to Villarreal in 2008. This is a brand new world when it comes to MLS.
Yeah. And keep in mind, Roberto Mancini thought enough of Giovinco and his level of play and the competition he was playing against to include him on the Italian national team, which is something he's probably going to end up giving up by this move that that they've engineered. But the perception is changing, because there was a time when Antonio Conte would not call up Giovinco because of his mindset about MLS. Well, that's obviously different now. So as we move forward, more and more teams will start looking at MLS and saying, okay, let's check out this talent. And you may see a team like FC Dallas, which is known for developing youth, suddenly become quite financially set up because of, hey, yeah, we'll ship out anybody. We don't care. Let's go. So it's going to be something to keep an eye on, because when PSG rates you, they are a known entity in the European world. They are a super club, and other eyeballs will take notice of that.
Absolutely. Nick, final thoughts on the wackiness of transfer window wintertime 2019.
MLS owned it for the first time in our league's history. Outside, I mean, we had an outbound transfer, not an inbound, that dominated the headlines of Sky Sports, where it was MLS product Miguel Almiron. That's only going to happen more and more going forward, but this is sort of a moon landing moment for MLS, and I don't think that it should be treated as anything but that. And I think that the Acosta transfer, even though it didn't happen, should also be marked in with this moon landing moment as well.
All right, Jarrett, thoughts on this wacky transfer window?
Nothing about Miguel Almiron outside of an Atlanta United kid looks right. Hurts. It's an awesome move, though. It's an awesome move for the league. It's an awesome move for the team. And aside from Atlanta being able to point at this thing, if I'm Lanús, I'm pointing at it too and saying, look what we can help develop. Mm-hmm. Bring your young players here. Bring your young players here, and we can be a stop on that bridge. So give me your young, cheap, explosive players. Come here, and you too can find the promised land in a couple of years. It may not be always a direct route, but I wouldn't be upset at all or surprised one bit if Lanús is pounding their chest after this one as well, because they did play a hand in Miguel Almiron, becoming what he became. Sure, he kind of hit his, product that we know now in Atlanta. But you go back and watch that Chattanooga game. He knew what he was doing before he got here. He didn't come here and looking like me on a football field.
Stephen Goff just tweeted, "It's over, no deal, details in a bit." Soccer Insider, Washington Post. Make sure you're following Stephen Goff. John, final thoughts on the closing of the transfer window for the major European leagues.
How does the rest of MLS respond? You've seen what Atlanta United has been able to do with their working model. You've seen what DC United has been on the cusp of doing, even though they've gone through the motions, just didn't get through the finish line. What DC United has been able to do and put themselves out there. You've seen what Toronto FC has not done to put themselves where they are. It's a lesson on a bunch of different levels. From one perspective, have a plan. That's the universal. What do you do with that plan? That's up to you. The evidence is in front of you in a bunch of different ways. There's a how-to and a developing how not to. Which path are you going to take, and what's your plan? That, for me, is the larger message for the other franchises in MLS today. You're seeing what two franchises were doing, active in the conversations on a global scale, multi-continent scale, and one for the wrong reason. How do the other franchises react after today? How do their models change? How do they twist them? Where do they go going forward? That's my question.
So MLS has nearly equaled last year's record MLS or transfer revenue coming in, and it's January 31st. The Acosta deal would have put it over the top, so not quite. But through one window, you've already done that. There will still be moves that'll happen. Again, other windows are open. MLS clubs can still add players, so don't get it twisted. MLS will see players come in. But this was the big closing of the window for the major European leagues. Keep an eye on Russia. Keep an eye on Portugal. Keep an eye on players going to Argentina or Brazil or the Middle East. Keep an eye on that. Keep an eye on Mexico for the rest of the night as well. You could see some moves that affect MLS there, especially Portland trying to get players and not making a whole lot of progress. We'll see if anything changes before the end of the night. It's been, I think, a window, and I'll even take it a step further than what Nick said. MLS was a winner here. I think American soccer as a whole was a winner here because the Christian Pulisic deal was part of this window as well, even though he's loaned back to Dortmund for the rest of the year. That's an American player who, by the way, spent most of his life thus far developing in the United States. Not players that we have seen in Europe who have American heritage and are able to have citizenship and move on from different clubs for big amounts. This is a player who developed in Pennsylvania and went to Dortmund and found another level, and now will be going to Chelsea for a crazy amount of money. That's part of it. Miguel Almiron going from Atlanta to Newcastle for a crazy amount of money. That's part of it. These other deals, whether they happened or not, the conversation around them, it's all part of it. MLS is evolving, and Atlanta came in at a time when maybe that process was just barely beginning to start. Now, it's in full bloom. Like, you are getting this evolution happening in front of our eyes, where you're seeing a player come in and start the first match for Atlanta United, biggest transfer fee to bring in a player at the time, and now you have sold him for the biggest transfer fee outgoing ever in league history. And he's going to a club that needs him and wants him, and the manager was willing to put his future on the line to get him. And the club was able to go out and get a loan to get this deal done now because they wanted him that bad. That says a lot about how things have progressed in just a couple of years. I think it will only continue, and in the summer, it's going to be a very interesting time for MLS because you're mid-season at that point, and you're going to have European clubs who look at what happened with Miguel, and if he goes over and does well with Newcastle, don't think other clubs aren't going to be looking at players. You're going to have clubs looking at what PSG was willing to spend on a Luciano Acosta, who was not rumored for this type of move up until very, very recently. And you're going to have more European clubs say, man, there's good deals in MLS. I want to go get some of those. And MLS clubs are going to have some very difficult decisions to make in mid-season this summer. That's going to be the key. It's a very different conversation for MLS clubs in that window than it is right now. But it's going to be a different landscape when we get there. So this has been fun, guys. We'll have to do this again.
Absolutely. Yeah.
When's the next transfer window?
Well, MLS is still open, but it's not quite the same thing, so we won't do anything for any of the other windows here. I think we'll have to do an MLS summer deadline show. Maybe it'll be a evening show when the deadline ends in the summer. And I don't know if those dates have been published just yet. Let me look because of the FIFA calendars. Actually, they have. August 7th. The MLS summer window runs from July 9th to August 7th. That's the one that's kind of like this one for the European leagues, where it's short, it's a month roughly, and it is, for us, mid-season. For them, it's going into the season, so it'll be a very different situation. So August 7th, put it on the calendar. We might have a pizza party like Big Sam and talk MLS transfers.
It's pizza.
Nick, you're in charge of getting good pizza.
We can make that happen.
All right. Soccer over there will be back on Monday, 6:30. We will see what happens this weekend all over Europe. We'll probably have some fallout on the Luciano Acosta near deal to PSG once we get details and anything else that might happen this weekend. And we'll be back with Soccer Down here tomorrow morning from 9 to 11. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We appreciate it. I don't know what to say. Mucha lira?
Mucha euro, y'all.
Except for DC.
All the lira, unless you're DC.
Yeah, unless you're DC. Mucha, whatever they're using in Saudi Arabia. I'm going to miss you, Giovinco.